stay?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this February 6, 2019 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. This month we have a full agenda and look forward to receiving information from the superintendent, staff, and other presenters as we continue important discussions on literacy, testing, business partnerships, the Ernst & Young implementation plan, and next steps in our strategic plan. These discussions are important as they inform our policy decisions and needed changes to our strategic plan. Most importantly, the decisions inform our public and make clear the State Board of Education and DPI priorities to stakeholders. We appreciate the time and preparation each month to make these meetings successful. I now welcome board members, advisors, staff, and on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. And for our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board committee sessions, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting when the board will vote on its action items. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record, and if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Buxton.
Consistent with last month, I need to recuse myself from EICS 8.
Got it. So noted.
Thank you.
So board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda, and if not, I seek a motion for approval. Is there approval?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second? A second by Mr. Chasteen. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll?
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Willoughby?
Yes.
Mr. McDevitt?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chasteen?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Thank you. The motion carries. We have an agenda. So we'll now proceed to our committee meetings, and we'll begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, and I'll turn to the committee chair, Mr. J.B. Buxton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of myself and Vice Chair Dr. Olivia Oxendine, we have a full agenda today. If you look at your agenda, we're going to make one alteration and move our issue session, our early reading issue session, up to the top of the agenda. So we can move through that, and then we'll come back without objection, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. So a couple things to get us oriented. Last month, we had the opportunity to level set on where we are in our reading achievement in the state, some of the key initiatives, including Read to Achieve, the degree to which this is a clear and stated priority by our North Carolina General Assembly, our State Board of Education, our department, and a lot of our partners. And so we had a chance to look at where we are, where we stand, and some of the challenges that are in front of us. We also had an opportunity to see in the past month since we met, for those of you who get Education Week, you may not all be old and get it in paper form like I do, but you'll notice that once again in our state's chances for success, or the chances for success for our kids, we sit at about 30th in the country. So not just average, but below average in terms of how our students do at the end of the day as they move out beyond high school into the workforce, into post-secondary participation. And whether you look at it in terms of post-secondary participation or earnings and a family-sustaining wage, we have challenges in where our kids are. Early reading, the degree to which we're building a solid foundation, critical as a piece of that, and that's been a part of this board's agenda for a while. So just in the larger context, placing this. We have today, I'm excited to present 3 conversations. We have Wolfpack Works, which was mentioned a number of times last month, a partnership of this department and board with North Carolina State University. They're going to come up first. We have the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation to come talk about the campaign for grade level reading, the pathways to reading success, and especially some of the early childhood imperatives around getting students ready to read by the end of third grade. And we had a number of conversations last month about early childhood-related issues. And then finally, we have Excellence in Education. Excel in Ed is their brand name. An organization, a national organization that is a leader in reading policy in the states, reading practice, and one that is very familiar with North Carolina and was helpful to us as we put our Read to Achieve law together, and is going to talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing in other states, with states that are making significant gains, as well as recommendations they would make to North Carolina on policy and practice. So what I'm going to do is, with that introduction, I'll bring the folks up. As always, please have conversation and questions as the presentations go. I think we got about 15 minutes for our first two, and then about 30 to 40 for our last one. And we're going to start with Wolfpack Works. And so I would ask Dr. Galloway and Dr. Hsu to be available to us, but want to bring up, make sure I get this right, Jill Griffin-Hagen from NC State University to do our presentation. Thank you.
And how do I get to?
Keep going.
Okay. Thank you for having us here today. I'm Jill Griffin-Hagen from NC State College of Education. This is my colleague.
Ann Harrington from North Carolina State University College of Education.
And we're happy to be here with you to talk a little bit about the Wolfpack Works initiative that we've been working on this year. Let's see if this will work. There we go. All right. So Wolfpack Works is a collaboration between our College of Education literacy faculty and the Department of Public Instruction. And in collaboration with Dr. Pam Hsu and her team at DPI, and also in conversation with our colleague Tripp Stallings, who's done a lot of the work evaluating Read to Achieve, and building on our success with preparing teachers, elementary teachers for early literacy instruction, we wanted to work on improving the results of Read to Achieve by focusing in on the kindergarten through second grade years and focusing in on improving early literacy instruction. So we designed this pilot initiative as a literacy-specific intensive induction program for kindergarten through second grade beginning teachers in some of our highest need school districts across the state. So this is the context we're working in. Again, we're thinking about what are the needs here in North Carolina and what are the needs in relation to Read to Achieve, where we can address early literacy instruction before kids get to that third grade retention or remediation stage. We wanted to focus on our highest need districts, and we identified these by looking at some of the districts that were lowest performing in literacy, but also had high needs in terms of high poverty school districts and school districts that had challenges around teacher retention, teacher turnover, and having the resources to best support beginning teachers. We're focused on beginning teachers because we know that there's a pipeline of teachers coming out of our teacher preparation programs and also out of a lot of pathways, including lateral entry teachers who need more support to go into the challenging context of teaching kindergarten through second grade and to put together what they may have learned in their teacher preparation program into providing quality core instruction for our youngest kids. Again, to intervene in those K-2 grades so our kids get the best opportunity before they fall behind in third grade and are not meeting benchmarks at that time. So these are the 16 school districts that we're currently partnering with. And as you can see, many are clustered in the north and east part of the state. We identified these districts based on historical data on third grade reading performance and partnered with the districts last summer to begin working with them to support their beginning teachers. Right now we're supporting about 160 beginning teachers, first and second year teachers in these districts who serve close to 3,000 K-2 students. And we have a three-pronged approach to this intensive induction support. First, we're providing blended professional development. And by blended, we mean both face-to-face professional development in a traditional sense, but also online professional development in the way of online modules that allow the teachers to receive ongoing professional development in early literacy while they're home in their districts. And many of those districts, of course, are rural and in outlying areas, so they can access professional development in their districts. We're also providing coaching, and our coaching is also a blend of face-to-face and distance coaching. We have a team of master early literacy teachers at NC State who are coaching the beginning teachers in their districts by visiting the teachers in their classrooms once or twice a month, and in the meantime, using web-based tools to coach those teachers at a distance. And finally, we're providing the beginning teachers with resources to help them become really strong early literacy teachers quickly so that they can be successful with their current students, but also build a pipeline of excellent teachers who will hopefully stay in those districts and serve as literacy leaders in their schools and in their communities. So we have resources for classroom instruction, things that teachers need to begin teaching young kids to read. And in many of our schools, we're finding that the teachers are going into classrooms that have few books or other instructional materials that we know, based on research, are really needed in order to provide high-quality early literacy instruction. And then we're also providing the districts with resources in terms of interventionists. And these are teachers who can support the beginning teachers by working with the students who are most struggling with reading in their classroom. So we know that particularly in high poverty districts, a lot of children are not quite meeting the benchmarks in terms of our progress monitoring and our assessments in early literacy, and they need that added intervention, that added instruction and really intensive support in those areas of early literacy. So bringing in an interventionist to work with those students can help mentor the beginning teachers as they're delivering core literacy instruction and learning how to meet the varied needs of those students who are having more difficulty learning to read.
So our coaching work and our work in the project focuses on 10 evidence-based literacy practices. Our school districts use a variety of core literacy programs, and these practices are intended to complement and supplement these core programs. We know in the end that programs don't teach children, teachers teach children. So our work focuses on building the capacity and
Janet
expertise.
Mason has left the conference.
Our work focuses on building the capacity and expertise of K-2 classroom teachers in the area of literacy. So you'll see an overview of what these 10 practices are. Within these practices, we focus on 10 specific indicators, and all of these practices are evidence-based. And we're happy to share with you the specifics, the indicators that we use in conjunction with these practices, as well as the evidence behind them. Because in the end, our goal, again, is to ensure that these classroom teachers have the expertise they need to teach all children to read, with the intention of not having to have so many interventions for children, because we want classroom instruction to meet the needs of most children. So in the end, we've learned that it does take a village. We know absolutely that everyone in this room cares deeply about early literacy instruction and achievement, and we do as well. So we want to make sure in our work that we're meeting the holistic needs of children and families. As Jill mentioned, many of our children and families live in poverty, so we need to look at their needs outside of the school setting as well as in the school setting. One of those needs has to do with the lack of books. So we know that in order for children to learn how to read, they have to have materials to read. So how can we combat what we can call book deserts, both in the classroom, where there are few texts available for children to read, as well as in children's homes, where unfortunately many of the children have few texts to be able to read. We also want to make sure that our classroom instruction is of the highest quality, so again, we can reduce the number of children who need to have reading interventions. And finally, to see what we can do to not only build the capacity of our classroom teachers, but also other administrators in the districts and other teachers within these districts, because we know we want to raise the bar for everyone involved in Wolfpack Works and beyond. So to conclude,
So as I mentioned, this is a pilot year, and we're still gathering evidence about the most effective elements of this new program and how they're working to support teachers. But we wanted to give you a glimpse at the work in action because we are beginning to get really positive feedback from our beginning teachers, their administrators in the school districts, and seeing the impact of this work already. So if whoever can click, I might be able to do it. Let's see if I can make this work. We want to show you a glimpse into one of our Wolfpack Works classrooms.
Especially with even just behavior in the classroom. Last year, I don't feel like my classroom management was even average, but now I feel like I've seen a lot of growth in the classroom management. I've seen an increase, especially in one of our new teachers, so second year teaching, I've seen an increase in even her in-class results with her students. So I feel Wolfpack Works plays a major role in that. I've seen a major change in her confidence.
I read books, and one or two people come over here and read books with me. We have to tell the story what's about and when and how did they solve it. Before I was in Miss Pig class, I didn't know how to spell problem. Yes. P-R-O-B-L-E-N.
So thank you. I don't know if you all have questions about the program right now.
Yeah, please hold 1 second, see if we have any board questions for our presenters. Sure. Dr. Oxendine and Dr. Wilby.
Questions. Thank you for the presentation. I've heard quite a bit about your initiative, so it's good to see it, meet you and to see the presentation. My question is, I understand it's a pilot. Do you plan to expand in other regions of the state? I saw, I think maybe one, are you working in Anson County?
we are.
Yeah, so again, we identified the districts based on some of the lowest performing districts. So the 16 we're working with are amongst those. We do hope to continue the work, and we're currently thinking about the best ways to expand. As you know, sometimes things expand too quickly, and it's quantity over quality. So one of the things we're thinking again is building capacity and a teacher leadership pipeline for strong literacy instruction in those districts we're working in. So we think that continuing those partnerships is going to be a first priority in those 16 districts.
And my other question has to do with the diversity profile. Are you working in schools with Hispanic, Native Americans, and the spectrum of diversity?
So when we're partnering with districts, we're working with all schools and all beginning teachers in that district. So as you can imagine, all of our districts represent diversity in different ways. But yes, I mean, the students and the teachers we're serving are highly diverse and in many different ways, in language, socioeconomic status, and race and ethnicity.
Thank you.
Dr. Wilby.
Thank you. I have a few questions, and they're not necessarily related to each other, but I'll just ask them. The resources that you mentioned preparing, are those available to all teachers across the state or just to the chosen districts?
Well, the one category of resources I was talking about is in terms of supporting those specific beginning teachers participating in the program. However, we are creating resources that are more expansive that will reach all teachers. One major resource is that this year we're developing those online professional development modules around these early literacy practices. And as we're rolling those out and sort of revising them and fine-tuning them, they're right now just available to the participating teachers, but at the end of this year, they'll be opened up to all North Carolina teachers.
Okay, and that leads me to the question about reading coaches. JB, I sort of feel like deja vu all over again. Reading coaches, not a new concept, but very important to help, especially beginning teachers. And again, with technology, that's something that could be expanded to reach all beginning teachers, I suppose. I really appreciated the reference to the whole child. You didn't mention Whole Child North Carolina, but that is the effort around making sure they're prepared. The funding issue for, I guess, related to your question, Dr. Oxendine, the expansion, I know there was initial funding. Was it 1 year? How did that funding go out to Wolfpack Reads?
And I don't know if Pam, you'd like to speak to that, but it was funded initially for 1 year.
Right now
Dr. Shoup.
Good morning. Yeah, right now we're looking at a 3-year rollout with every a task order. So every year we'll have an opportunity to evaluate and see what we need to do moving forward. But we're looking at moving this out over the next 3 years, but doing it in gradual steps. So every year at the task order, you have a chance to evaluate, and decide on what lessons learned and how we're going to move forward.
But there is funding to carry this forward in
Yes.
the budget.
Yes.
Okay. And of course, I have to, always look at this as, the districts chosen. I understand why they were chosen with their being lowest performing, but I hope around this data that you're collecting, you'll also be able to tie in what happens when there's pre-K for these at-risk children who so need it in these districts. I'm just, on that note, we'll say we've had some really powerful support recently from not only Jim Goodnight, but some other folks, business leaders in this state who are absolutely behind that effort for pre-K. And, I still contend that's the most effective place to spend our money. Hopefully you'll include that in some of this data that you're collecting. How many children have had pre-K, how it affected them, how it impacts them at 3rd grade reading.
And lessons learned too from this will also inform us on how we can support pre-K and what actually is going on in those classrooms and what they should be doing in those classrooms. So yeah, absolutely, that is not in the OEL, my Office of Early Learning. We're looking at how we then bring that team with our kindergarten, the pre-K and K, and start creating a stronger alignment specifically around these literacy pieces. So thank you.
Mr. Ford.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much for being here. I apologize for coming in midway through your presentation, but I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm particularly grateful that you guys are focusing in the areas that you are. Certainly the rural areas, whenever we consider equity, are parts of the state that we tend to forget, right, under-resourced. So very grateful for your work. And I saw some of the interventions, the 16 research-based sort of strategies. I wanted to know, I have 2 questions. The first one is, does DIBELS and the use of DIBELS play a part in what you offer the K-2 teachers early on? I just wanted to know.
Yeah, so obviously all of our teachers are giving the DIBELS, the M-Class Reading 3D assessments, and using that to monitor progress with their students and determine who needs interventions. So one of the things we support them with is understanding those data. We have the interventionists in the district who are helping them design and deliver the interventions, but we've invited folks to, in collaboration with DPI, to come to more training on that assessment system, and the coaches work individually with the teachers to understand their data and how that that can inform their instruction. So DIBELS and all those testing systems are a big part of that.
Excellent, because I know phonological, awareness and fluency is a huge part of that. The fluency part, right? So the ability for kids to be able to sound words out is one part, right? But then the ability to be able to read those words, comprehend them at a certain speed, is that also part of the interventions that K-2 teachers are being instructed on?
It is. So we take a comprehensive perspective to literacy instruction, where we're focusing on the 5 pillars: scientifically based reading research, evidence-based reading instruction, combined with the structures of effective reading. So read alouds, shared reading, small group reading, independent reading, because we need to both have a focus on skill and strategy instruction, as well as giving students opportunity to read. So that's exactly what we're doing.
Well, what you're doing is precisely, I think, what helps scaffold and build us up to kids being able to pass reading tests in 3rd grade. And so this is the sort of intervention that we need to continue to look at going forward. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Godwin.
I love everything about what you're doing. I just want to say that I especially like the piece of the collaboration with the families, because I really think that is such a missing link in so many areas. So can you elaborate on what that looks like with the WOLCAT program, how you are reaching out to the families and including them in this process? Absolutely.
Well, one thing we're doing, so one of our big focuses is on building capacity of these beginning teachers so that they can, again, take on those roles of working with families. And so we talk a lot with them about it being bi-directional. So we want to invite families into the school, and we want them to share what they're doing at home, their home language, their family literacy practices, and value that, while also giving the beginning teachers tools to communicate with families, to send books home, to support and train their students' families to read with them outside of school, to provide support during the summer when they're not in school, and all of those pieces. So we're really trying to build the teachers' capacity to really collaborate with families, and that's a big focus.
Right. Superintendent.
Thank you both so much for what you're doing. I'm copied on a lot of emails. I know you've been going to the textbook warehouse and getting books and getting those books out to students who need them most. So I thank you for that. I just want to let you know, this is not a program that might grab as many headlines as when we find funds and we can deliver that to teachers with supplies, or buy every K-3 teacher an iPad. But this program is right now one of the things I'm most proud of that have happened at DPI in the last 2 years. It is really something that I have to thank Pam Shue and Chloe Gossage, Lindsay Wakely, who's not with us anymore. Those 3 found the funding that was in this building that wasn't being utilized for things like this, and we started this program. And this is a true partnership with DPI. And I am just so excited that we are building out a model that could be scaled across the state to address these challenges that teachers are having in these early years with teaching reading. And so happy to be able to see, and really excited to see what the results are after this first year. And thank you. I was thinking through all that when I saw the video. Thank you for putting that video together, because we haven't actually seen it out in action. We've been hearing great things from the field. But we're really excited about this, and you can count on me to try to expand programs like this. This is great. Thank you all. And thank you for making it. One part of this also was that resource bank for all teachers, because we know this is not just beginning teachers. This is not just teachers in K-3. I was a high school teacher, and I had 9th graders who are reading on a 4th grade level. This is something where we can make a resource bank for all teachers to be able to go and get this great advice on how to teach reading. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Mr. McDevitt. We're going to do one more, and then we're going to
just to follow up. It might be a little premature. We might be going to hear this in later, but superintendent raised it, and it's a kind of a follow up on Olivia's question about expansion, and then the response on the funding and moving forward. And I think the two cross. If we're going to expand, it's going to require the funding. And then the question that I assume that the iPads are what we're using on DIBELS, and some are using Chromebook. And where does that professional development come from? Where is that? Is that a piece of that?
Right. So, so the districts, I believe, and Pam, you may be able to speak to this better. The districts are charged with training all the teachers and providing the necessary training and materials and everything to deliver the M-Class DIBELS assessments through the iPads. But one of the things that we found, about almost half of the teachers we're working with are lateral entry in these districts. So in a lot of cases, they are coming in with less of that foundational knowledge before that first day they walk in the classroom. So sometimes they need a little additional support and mentoring with those systems, both to be able to deliver the assessments and also to be able to interpret the data and use it to inform instruction. So I think that's where we kind of supplement what the district provides with that basic training and those basic supplies and everything in order to really help the beginning teachers get up to speed where they need to be as quickly as possible.
I guess this is for the superintendent or somewhere else, but do we have a plan for getting the rest of those iPads out there? Is that part of this expansion, and how many of those do we still have in the warehouse?
I don't know the exact number. We were able to use.
Is it in the tens or hundreds or thousands? I mean, I don't.
Low thousands it was in.
Thousands.
We were able to, and I can't speak to this a lot, I can tell you in closed session, we were able to get government efficiencies by doing this convenience contract that already existed in the state with
I'm
Apple.
less worried about that than I am
well,
about. Okay, I understand that. I don't want to read it.
Then there were districts that said, well, we'd rather use the Google Chrome pad. So we said, okay, and we gave them the funds, and they used that. So we actually have some iPads in the warehouse that we are going to get out to districts in a strategic way as they start to implement personalized learning. That was going to happen before the hurricane. When the hurricane happened, we had to put all that on hold to focus strictly on the hurricane, all the work that had to go around the hurricane. We hope to do that this spring after we make some more announcements about some exciting steps we're taking on personalized learning and really partner with schools who commit to taking that next step to personalized learning, helping them close any gaps they have with the technology. It's very exciting. Right now, through the Read to Achieve program, we have allotted from the state for every kindergartner, first grade, second grade, third grade teacher, if they're a reading teacher, they now have been allotted from the state 2 of these devices. So we have high-speed internet in every classroom now. We've got 2 devices allotted to these teachers, and we're going to start closing that gap for districts that haven't done so already, so we can really start to propel personalized learning throughout all of North Carolina.
So you won't have to repurpose those. I keep hanging on to what the vice chair said a month or 2 ago, and that is that comment that you made about we're still trying to figure out what personalized learning means, because it means different things to different folks. And so
I'm not trying to figure out what personalized learning means. I know what it means.
Well,
it's in our ESSA plan.
Yeah, well, that'd be great to share that. Well, yes, but personally,
all right,
we got lots and lots.
We're
getting away from it. That's a different thing. But my question is, are we repurposing those from Read to Achieve over to a different purpose?
No, it's absolutely, those were purchased with funds that were meant to support early childhood education, funds that were not used for some reason from this building. Now that they've been used and purchased, they still will remain with the kindergarten through third grade focus on literacy.
All right, we're going to do one more question on this.
And this is going to take, you can start your clocks. This is going to be 30 seconds. I will be very excited to know that you have ventured into other regions of North Carolina, specifically in the region where we have so many American Indian students, in the Robinson, Cumberland, Hoke, Scotland areas. Because if I can, I don't have all the facts correctly dotted in my brain, but based on the accountability report that the State Board approved last fall, it was either in September or October, probably September, the Native Americans, American Indian students out of, I believe, this is where I'm going to go fuzzy, 13 target areas, the American Indian students missed 11 of those areas. So your Wolfpack initiative in literacy is desperately needed in the pockets that I just outlined. Yeah. So let me know when you're coming.
Okay. Right. I agree. Thank you very much. Don't let my Carolina tie. After last night, undermine
Wolfpack
my
works.
respect for what you all are doing.
Wolfpack works wasn't last night.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it. I just want to remind the board, part of what we're trying to do here is identify those key areas, and I want to give the 4 that I wrote down here: interventionists, reading coaches, and interventionists with students, strong instruction materials, including books for students, evidence-based instruction focused on what we know works, and then creating those strong instructional systems in districts to support beginning teachers, elementary teachers.
I would add one more to it, is
Please.
expansion.
And, right, but doing that work, expanding that work, because coming out of this issue session, we're going to be looking at board policy, department practice, and partnerships with our legislature in order to reverse that downward trend we've seen in our reading scores. So keep that in mind as we come up. Mandy, I want to pull you up. Mandy Bleininger from the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation is going to talk about the pathways to grade level reading, work that's happened over the last couple of years, and some of the pre-K issues we talked about last time.
Great, thank you, Mr. Buxton. We are going to hit 3 things today. I want to talk just for a second about the importance of starting at birth when we're looking at 3rd grade reading outcomes, which I don't think I have to convince this crowd of. Second, I'm going to give you a short overview of the pathways to grade level reading process so that you can have some context for the recommendations. This process was extremely vetted. It's been a 3-year effort over hundreds of folks, of early learning leaders across the state. And then third, we'll get into the specific actions from the action framework that are related to education. Also, I'm happy to announce the action framework was officially released this morning on our website, so there's a beautiful report there for folks to check out. So just briefly, obviously reading at grade level by the end of 3rd grade is a key milestone. You guys have been talking about it for a while. I don't need to convince you on it. These are numbers that you've seen. This is an urgent issue that we need to address in our state if we want to have economic competitiveness going forward. And if we want to address 3rd grade reading, we have to start here with our babies. We know that the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation focuses on birth to 8 because this is the most rapid development period in human life, and it really lays the foundation for all of the development that comes after. Dr. Shonkoff at Harvard Center for the Developing Child said brains are built, not born, and we know the brain science. Babies build neural connections in their brains at millions a second, at 1 million per second. And if they're used, they're strengthened. If they're not, they wither away. So it's important that we give children really strong experiences in their first 8 years. All of their developmental pathways peak during this 8-year period. And we know as terms of our ROI, we get the biggest return on investment when we're investing in our youngest children. The good news is this is not rocket science. Research is very clear that a portfolio of investments in children's health, in their families and communities, and in their education is how we want to get them reading on grade level by 3rd grade. Excuse me. Which you are very aware with your whole school, whole community, whole child model. You are already looking at kids in that way. Another piece of great news is that North Carolina voters get this. In a bipartisan poll that was conducted in the fall, 80% of voters put supporting early childhood education over reducing business taxes in the state. And even if you look across political lines, you see that a majority of folks in every party would put early childhood education over reducing business taxes. So that's something that people aren't always aware of, and it's important for us to always put that front and center. This support has been increasing steadily over the 6 years that this poll has been in place. It's hard to see here, but this is 2014 to 2018, and it's just going up every year. So the public gets it. So the North Carolina Pathways to Grade Level Reading Initiative was really established to answer some of these questions. What would happen if we all started measuring the same things, building our strategies and our policies based on how children's brains actually develop, and all moving in the same direction? Pathways is an initiative of the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation in close collaboration with Smart Start, Best NC, and NC Child. The main driving factor behind Pathways is its cross-sector approach, because as we know, children are whole children. They don't come in silos. We also need to ensure that our systems aren't thinking and our funding isn't working in silos. So in order to build this action framework, we brought together folks from all different early childhood sectors, from 0 to 5 and K3, which don't often talk to each other, across political lines, to ensure that we could come up with a consensus set of recommendations that could be implemented across the early childhood spectrum. Here's examples of some of the hundreds of Pathways partners that were included in this process. There are state agencies, There are nonprofits and advocates across the political spectrum. There are folks representing professional associations. There were teachers, nurses, pediatricians. It was a really cross-sector group of people. Pathways also uses an equity lens. As we know, based on the data and research, race in America is a driving factor in determining children's outcomes because of structural racism in our systems and explicit and implicit bias in our society. Pathways takes an explicit but not exclusive focus on racial equity for that reason. We also look at inequities based on geography, income, gender, etc. Pathways had 3 phases. There are a lot of slides in the presentation you received, and I'm not going to walk through them now for time, but there's a lot of information in there. The first phase was really to say, what do we need to measure to know that that children are on a pathway to grade level reading? The second phase was to say, okay, if these are the measures that matter, where should North Carolina focus as a state? What does our data look like? And then the third phase was to say, okay, what should we do about it? We know what matters. We know where North Carolina should focus. What are the actions that we should recommend that the state put in place? I'll let you look at these in your leisure. These are the different factors that research shows us matter for 3rd grade reading. These are the education ones. There are also family and community factors and health and development factors, looking at that whole child approach. When the state then said, okay, where should North Carolina focus as a state? This is what the Pathways partners really came down to. High quality birth through 8 early care and education, regular school attendance, and ensuring children's social and emotional health. They said if we could get those 3 things in place, we would really be moving our 3rd grade reading outcome measure. And so then they launched into, okay, what should we do about it? What expectations should we hold of our child and family systems? And what actions should we propose that North Carolina take? Those actions had some very specific criteria that the Pathways partners used. There were hundreds and hundreds of potential policies, and they narrowed it down to the framework that you see. The input into this framework came, like I said, from hundreds of stakeholders across the state, from 14 local community conversations so that we had some local voice, from a meta-analysis of parent voice from across the state, from research on what moves the needle, particularly for children of color in these areas. Pathways is really now serving as a foundation for many of the early childhood state level initiatives in our state, like the Leandro Commission, the Early Childhood Action Plan, My Future NC Commission recommendations, and others. As I mentioned, it fits very well with your whole school, whole community, whole child model. I'm gonna get now into the recommendations from the framework, and I'm only gonna focus on the education specific ones, but I do hope that the board takes a minute in all of your spare time to look at the other recommendations as well, which are around children's social and emotional health, because they really do tie into your whole child model. So there's kind of 4 buckets of recommendations around education that I want to present to you. So the first is really about ensuring a great teacher for every child and a great leader for every school. So that's about supporting incentives to ensure that we have the highest quality educators in the highest need schools and early education programs. We will always have good educators in low need schools, and we need to ensure we have them in high need schools as well. It's about recruiting and retaining educators and school leaders of color. The research is clear that children of color do better when they have 1 or 2 teachers of color in their elementary school years. It's about informing research-informed teacher education and administrator education and professional development, and Dr. Griffenhagen did an excellent job of describing what research-informed means when it comes to that kind of professional development. And these are some topics that it's going to be really important to educate our mostly white female teaching staff on, because they do not currently reflect the students that they're teaching. So things around social emotional health and learning, early childhood development, trauma, resilience, implicit bias, cultural competency. And then the last one there is about creating interactive birth through 8-year-old professional development for early educators in the birth through 5 system, and for elementary educators in the K through 3 system, so that they can learn together and understand that whole continuum of child development. The next bucket is around preparing our schools to teach every child that's walking into the schools. We sometimes talk about school readiness. Guess what? When they're 5, they're ready. They're coming. So it's about making sure our schools are ready to teach every child that walks in that door. So it's about hiring sufficient support staff like psychologists and social workers and school nurses. It's about ensuring that our systems are culturally and linguistically relevant so that every child that walks in feels like they belong and every family feels like they belong. So that's accountability systems, assessments, standards, and curricula. So all the way down the whatever that is. It's about developing linked and intentional strategies across schools and districts to really engage and learn from families. And as Ms. Godwin mentioned, it's very important to connect with parents. A lot of parents have very good reasons for not wanting to come into a school. And so connecting with parents and really listening to them and understanding what that's about can really move us forward. And then setting intentional strategic goals for racial equity. This is something we can plan for, just like we want to plan for any other outcome that we want to see. And eliminating suspensions and expulsions in early education and really minimizing those in the early K through 3 grades. Third bucket is around preparing children for success in kindergarten. So these are a lot of 0 to 5 recommendations. The first one's all about expanding childcare subsidies for these kids, raising the subsidy rates so that they reflect the actual quality of care, the cost of high quality care, and then maybe providing higher rates in underserved communities where parents may not be able to support the full cost of high quality care. We need to screen our babies and toddlers and connect them to appropriate dyadic or 2-generation services like home visiting. That may sound like it's outside the realm of education, but that is education and development for babies and toddlers. It's also about increasing access to high-quality infant and toddler child care. A report came out recently that almost every county in our state is considered an infant and toddler child care desert because there are so few slots for the little ones, and that's because it's very expensive to provide that service. Increasing standards and compensation for birth through 5 educators. We know that our birth through 5 educators do not make the salaries that our public school educators or even our pre-K teachers make. So that's a complicated conversation. It's about increasing standards and education and about increasing salary. And then finally, investing in full day, full year preschool for the most at-risk children, including wraparound services like transportation and meals. The last bucket is actually not from the Pathways Action Framework. This is from a report that Ms. Willoughby mentioned, I think, that just came out recently from NEAR, which is the National Institute for Early Education Research, and is specifically written for North Carolina about barriers to expansion of our NC pre-K. She mentioned that Dr. Goodnight came out and a bunch of business folks to support the release of this report in the last couple of weeks. So I put the highlights on here of the recommendations from that report. The first one is really about targeting expansion of pre-K in counties based on actual need, looking at census data of at-risk kids in the county, rather than talking about waiting lists, since that really is not necessarily representative of the actual need in the county. Incentivizing high-quality early education centers that currently do not participate in NSAID pre-K to participate, and ways to do that are raising reimbursement rates to support high-quality care, and offering startup grants to high-quality centers that want to participate. You can also look county-specific and look at supplements to address specific barriers that different counties are having, because it does vary across the state. As we know, all our counties are a little bit different. Supporting private classrooms to raise teacher pay to reach parity with the public school classroom. So an NC pre-K teacher in a district school has a higher salary on average than an NC pre-K teacher in a private child care center. So trying to get some pay parity there. Increasing the percentage allowed for administrative costs and blending pre-K and subsidy dollars to better serve children. So currently a family has a choice, say, between taking an NC pre-K slot that is 6 hours a day and 10 months a year, or taking a child care subsidy that is full day, full year care. For a family that's trying to work, one of those seems like a much better deal than the other one. But we know how high quality our NC pre-K program is. That's where we want our most at-risk kids. So using those subsidy dollars to blend with a child who already is carrying an NC pre-K slot may increase uptake of those NC pre-K dollars by families. And then consider some way to allocate dollars through the public school allocation formula. That is also a very complicated conversation. We have to be sure we do not pull 4-year-old dollars away from our private child care centers because they use the 4-year-olds to supplement those infants and toddlers that are so expensive that we already don't have enough slots for. So that's a complicated conversation, but it's a way to blend better our local, state, and federal funds for each child and really leverage those non-state dollars. I will pause there. My contact information is here if there are questions or anybody is interested in following up after. And I would encourage the state board, we would love to see you endorse the Pathways to Grade Level Reading Action Framework, and I hope that's something you'll consider.
Ms. Bleidinger, get any questions or comments? on what was a multi-year effort by a lot of stakeholders to inform this process.
Very good.
I'll do a quick thank you to you as well. I'm glad to see y'all involved with the My Future NC Commission, and I have made known that we need to bring preschool more into the fold when we talk about the leadership there too. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Mr. Ford.
Yeah, I just want to really comment and applaud the framework. I think what's of particular note, and not just for us but every other system as well, is the sort of, as you mentioned, cross-sector, interdisciplinary approach to the way they've addressed pre-K. They've intentionally broken up silos. I'm particularly excited about the willingness to call out systemic racism, to talk about socioeconomic status, and talk about social-emotional learning, all as parts of the greater whole. And not just to mention it, but to make it consistently a focus at almost every slide. It was part of the target, or was part of the assessment, or part of the measurement. This, I think, stands out as an exemplar for how, we, not just in education, but other sectors as well, can help to create frameworks to really make lasting change. And I know it's a while for us to see whether, in fact, this works, but it seems to me all the ingredients are there to really make a recipe for success. So I'm grateful for that.
Thank you for that comment. And if I can just mention that the racial equity focus was raised up by the folks who participated, the hundreds of people who participated in this, as the most important part of the process. I was a little surprised and really excited by that. It gave me a lot of hope.
Swelby.
Great report. Thank you very much for all the work, and I hope that you will buy a billboard in some strategic locations with slide 11 that says 80%. Yes. 80%. I think that early education should be a higher priority than reducing business taxes. I'd love to see that on some billboards.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. It's excellent. And the brain science is non-controversial science, and it's compelling, and it can actually be done in an elevator speech, which is unlike a lot of educational issues. It can be done in a two-sentence elevator speech. And so, but the bottom line after that is, one of the points you raised is the lack of compensation for pre-K educators. And the second part of that is the brain science development shows that ages of 0 to 3 are critical and impactful. And as a state, we're not doing much of anything compelling yet in that area, and probably doesn't fall within the aegis of this board to reach down to age 0 or age 1, but it actually matters tremendously in terms of what we do. And so how we go forward and reconciling that, including that in our discussion as we go forward, I think becomes important. So I'm particularly glad you're here to present, and I hope we can find ways to incorporate long-term in what we're doing ages even before 4, because they're important. So thank you. You brought that home very well.
Just paying close attention to your slides, I can tell this was very complex work, very worthwhile work. As a minority myself, I'm intrigued by the notion of racial equity. So tell me how that plays out. How would that play out in an actual teaching, learning, in a structural setting, or not instructional, political context, structural setting? Sure. How do you get at that?
So Pathways was very focused on state and perhaps district level policy and practice. I would look to programs like Wolfpack Works to talk about how to do things in the classroom. But what we ensured is that as the folks were thinking about what policies they wanted to recommend, they constantly had this racial equity lens. Our wonderful partners, Kathleen Krabs and Sterling Freeman of Open Source Leadership, who supported us in this work, kept saying you have to keep putting the slippery fish of race back on the table, because people don't want to talk about it and it slides off often. And so by continually putting that slippery fish back on the table, you end up with a different set of policies and recommendations than you would have ended up with otherwise. Instead of it being that we need more high quality educators, which of course we do, we need more high quality educators of color. We need more high quality administrators of color. So it sets the tone for then those policies to feed down into the classroom setting.
Mr. Wallace, and then Ms. Godwin just jump in after him.
I did cut you off? Okay. I definitely want to applaud the verbiage used in your presentation, and I just refocused it right then. But an unintended benefit of your work is this war we've had on closing the gap. I've been in it for 17 years, and we've been fighting it for 17 years. And what you're doing right now, the best way to close the gap is never to let one begin in the first place. And what you're doing is pretty much is going to start doing that. As a high school administrator, secondary teacher, when the gap gets to us, it is so broad, it's so hard to overcome, and it just does something to the instructional approach of teachers, and it adds to their strength. So I just applaud your effort and what you're doing, and definitely be supporting you, and I hope success.
Got him.
During the last meeting, I made a comment about how we needed to not just focus on birth, pre-K, but to include kindergarten, first grade, and second grade in the narrative. I'm so thankful that you put that information in about the brain and its development, and how from 0 to 8 years old, that's those target years where we need to really invest in resources and training and just providing everything we can to get those kids ready for reading in 3rd grade. I love the quote that brains are built, not born, and I use the analogy of building a home and having that foundation. It has to be strong. So I really hope that there's some General Assembly people listening in on this conversation this morning, and will invest in the foundation for our children so we can become a better North Carolina in the end. Thank you for all this work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Appledinger, take back to the foundation this board's full and absolute support and endorsement of every aspect of this plan. We want to be your partner. We want to accomplish this plan.
Thank you very much. I'll hold you to it.
We'll be glad to be held to that standard.
That's well said.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Blatter, very much. Appreciate your time. Now I'd like Ms. Kerry Miller to come and join us. Ms. Miller is the Policy Director for Early Literacy at Excel in Ed, and I want to thank her and I think her colleague, Ryan Mahoney, for being with us in North Carolina. Thank you for your prior support in our state's effort to focus on reading, but thank you also for being with us today to talk about what we're seeing in other states as well that are making gains in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Bucks, and I appreciate the invite here to share with you all a few things, really talking about what the landscape looks like nationwide in respect to K-3 reading policies. I will say in advance that there is a major area of focus on early literacy nationwide. There are many states that are actually in the process of passing similar policies like Read to Achieve to help support teachers and to help ensure kiddos can read by the end of 3rd grade. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm also here today to share a little bit about 2 states that have adopted a Read to Achieve-like policies that have had pretty substantial success since the enactment of those policies. So to highlight some of the practices they have in place to support teachers and to ensure teachers are providing instruction based on the science of reading to address the needs of individual students, again, to ensure they reach grade level proficiency by the end of 3rd grade. First and foremost, I think it's important to recognize why Read to Achieve was established in North Carolina, as well as multiple states across the nation. And again, I think you all know the importance of grade level reading. The stats are just too obvious to ignore in respect to whether a kid can read by the end of 3rd grade predicts whether they're going to graduate from high school or not. We know that high school dropouts make up a good deal of individuals that struggle in our economy as well. And so the importance of Read to Achieve and to really catch kids early, identifying the need that they have in respect to the instructional needs they have, addressing their needs, individualized, specific to their reading need, with the retention as the last resort, ensuring that kids that are below grade level receive a year of intensive intervention services with the best teacher to catch up. These are the stats I won't belabor, as we all know in this room the importance of reading by the end of 3rd grade and how it impacts our students moving forward in their education career as well as their professions moving forward. So here's what it looks like across the nation in respect to states that have adopted comprehensive K-3 reading policies in some form. You'll see a number of states, as a matter of fact, 36 states have adopted some form of policy as it relates to early literacy or grade level reading. And then our dark blue states you see reflected here are those states that have adopted a comprehensive K-3 reading policy in some form. And you'll see North Carolina is one of those states that have adopted a comprehensive K-3 reading policy. A little bit of, in respect to what we're seeing across the nation, in respect to results, we do have 8 states that have adopted a comprehensive K-3 reading policy, again, similar to Read to Achieve, that have adopted or had the policy long enough to start looking at impact in a descriptive way. We do use the National Assessment of Education Progress to take a look at the impact since the enactment of the policy due to its assessment that's administered across the nation, so for comparability. And 8 states with comprehensive K-3 reading policies made greater improvements than states without such policy. And the 2 in which I'm going to hone in on for today are Florida and Mississippi, because they've had the biggest impact on student achievement since the enactment of their policy. You'll see at the bottom of this slide also some research specific to Florida's policy and retained students. It is a component of the Read to Achieve policy, as it is a component to many of the 12 comprehensive K-3 reading policy states in which I described to you on the previous slide. And this is research specific to, well, how do those retained kids fare as they progressed grade to grade moving forward after the retained year? And the research is strong in that students that were retained and given an additional year of intensive interventions and support with a highly effective teacher outperformed those that just missed the cut score for promotion all the way through 9th grade. Also, retained kids, when compared to those kids that just met the cut score for promotion, they take less remediation courses and also graduate with a higher GPA. That is specific to Florida's K-3 reading policy, a comprehensive approach that includes a retention factor. There's a lot of controversy in respect to the retention component of any of these policies, and rightfully so. Much past research suggests retention doesn't work. But retention as part of a comprehensive K-3 reading policy that's completely prescribed and supported in intervention delineated specific to student specific needs in that retained year with the best teacher in which they could receive sets them up for future success. That is the last resort, right? Retention is last resort. The goal of these policies is to ensure kids reach grade level proficiency by the end of 3rd grade, setting them up for success for the 4th grade coursework that becomes much more rigorous to tackle. So this is just an expansion of this. So again, this is NAEP data. You'll see buckets of states based on when they enacted a K-3 reading policy. Florida, we kind of refer to the mothership of this policy just because they've had it the longest. And you can see the performance of Florida students in respect to non-K-3 reading states, the red line representing those non-K-3 reading states. And I want to flip you over to the right side of that chart representing Mississippi. Mississippi's had this policy the least amount of time and has had substantial success since the enactment of the policy. They adopted it in 2013, and you can see how they compare to non-K-3 reading program states, red line representing the non-K-3 reading program states, and compared to their progress they've made since the enactment of their particular policy. So those are the 2 states in which I'm going to hone in on in respect to sharing some of their practices of implementation to where we believe this is what's given them the success in these states. Starting with Florida, a policy is only as good as its implementation. And so it's really important to focus on what has made Florida successful in regards to how they implemented this particular policy. And I have to say, first and foremost, it started with leadership. In the state of Florida at the time, Governor Bush was our governor. He was a strong proponent and advocate for ensuring kids could read by the end of 3rd grade. And it was a major priority in our state top down. There was a Just Read Florida office established, creating staff members to ensure effective implementation. There was a statewide assessment system, something very similar to what's been created here in North Carolina, that basically assessed students where they are, identified if they had reading difficulties, and also helped inform instruction to meet the needs of those individual students. It also included what's called a progress monitoring and reporting network, which is basically a database that instantly that information was uploaded and provided resources for teachers to inform instruction. It provided letters for parents so they knew how to support the areas of weaknesses their child had in reading, and also delineated the areas of strengths they had as well. It also allowed for districts to pull reports to determine, well, which of our schools may need more support in certain areas with delivery of reading instruction. It went all the way up to the state level in regards to the data reporting component, all for continuous improvement and professional development support, delivering in a strategic way. The next bucket you see.
Mr. Buxton, may I
Please.
pause and ask
Dr.
a question, or I may lose it down the way. So talk a bit more about the progress monitoring. Is that, how systematic is that, on a monthly basis, every 6 months, or how often is that?
So great question. In policy and legislation, it's required to be administered within the first 30 days. So a screening assessment within the first 30 days of kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, screening all students. Any student identified with a reading deficiency would be continuously monitored from there, a minimum of 3 times per year, but through what's probably similar in North Carolina as well, through the response to intervention process, that would happen more regularly, especially for students that are struggling immensely and need that additional support. So an ongoing progress monitoring way would happen more often, but in legislation, it was 3 times a year for kids identified with a reading deficiency.
So I'm trying to layer this, and this is where Lisa, I'm going to need your help. So in a classroom, we do the DIBELS and the M through M class and so on and so forth. So something similar to that is going on in Florida. Okay. So in addition to that instant data coming into the teacher, then we do the progress monitoring on top of that periodically. Okay. So is that what we're missing?
Nope.
No, I'm saying the progress monitoring
We're
piece.
doing progress monitoring.
You have that component in place too.
Right. Systematically?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's required.
Go ahead.
So the next bucket, in which I think made Florida quite successful, and I honestly think it's the most important, so it's great to see some preliminary work in respect to supporting teachers in the state through the Wolfpack Works program, is the educator training component. There was statewide rollout of K-3 reading academies that educated every kindergarten, first, second, and third grade teacher on the science of reading and how to use assessment data to better inform instruction to meet the needs of each individual child. We also have a nationally recognized research center called the Florida Center for Reading Research that we were able as a state to tap into, that really helped create the professional development training. They also helped us create teacher resources that were basically student-centered activities based on the science of reading, once again. And then we had a structure in place to provide teacher supports. In the state of Florida, we had 30 regional coordinators that provided support to school-based reading coaches across the state. Those 30 regional coordinators supported 587 reading coaches that were established in Title I schools. At the time, it was under a federal program called Reading First, which allowed us to provide such services at the time. There was immense support for teachers after this policy was enacted. And I think that is one area that I would definitely push North Carolina to consider and think heavily about investing in, providing teachers with professional development to ensure they have the knowledge and skill to teach all kiddos to read. Any student with a reading difficulty, students with dyslexia, students that need enrichment to continue to push them forward, all kids. So ensuring these teachers have the skill set to provide instruction to meet the needs of all those individual students. Ensuring that training is based on the science of reading. It's challenging for me to see that this is still a challenge across our nation, that we know actually how to effectively teach kids to read, yet we still are ignoring the science in respect to that. And so I think this is a critical component. And again, I think with the pilot going on with Wolfpack Works, we have a great opportunity in North Carolina to truly think about how to strategically expand that, right? And they're dead on in respect to strategically expanding. And then the next bucket you see is extending learning opportunities. One thing that's great about North Carolina, and different than every other 12 states that have a comprehensive K-through reading policy, you will have summer reading camp opportunities for first, second, and third grade students that have been identified with a reading difficulty in some form. This is an opportunity that I think needs to be tapped, ensuring that the summer programs, one, parents know about them, right? Two, that they're of quality, ensuring the best teachers are in place to provide those instructions during the extended opportunity during summer camps. And I know there has been a lot of work in respect to ensuring that occur over the past year and a half or so. There's also business community partnerships were a major component of implementation of the comprehensive K-through reading policy in Florida that allowed for us to raise awareness of the importance of literacy statewide. So every stakeholder had knowledge and knew how to support literacy at the K-3 level in some form or fashion. And we can talk more about that if you have any questions on how we went about that. And lastly, funding. Taking the funds you currently have, taking a look at all the pots of funds in which are currently available to you. If K-3 reading is a priority in the state, reprioritizing some of those existing funds to support your efforts. That is one major task that was given to the Department of Education in Florida when this policy was passed, and it took bringing everybody to the table to make some decisions on how best to prioritize early literacy and fund early literacy practices that are successful. This slide, I won't belabor this, but gives you some details in respect to a lot of the stuff in which I just talked about. The one in which I think is not as prevalent in North Carolina as it was in Florida is the coach support, the structure for coach support. So having regional coordinators, maybe expanding regional coordinators to support coaches that are at the school level, and a coach's job is to build master teachers of reading within a school setting. So any child that walks into that school has an opportunity to be in front of a teacher that can effectively teach them how to read. That is the ultimate goal of a reading coach, but it requires quality coaches. So it's very important in respect to the selection of the folks that are going to be fulfilling that position, knowing that they may have been really good teachers of reading, doesn't mean they're going to be really good coaches to adults. And so the adult learning component, being able to facilitate adult learning and working with adults is critically important to that particular role, if that's something considered in North Carolina. Just some of the results specific in Florida. Since the enactment of the policy, we've seen great success and great improvement across it's over a decade. Gosh, it's been now 16 years since that policy was enacted. You'll notice, based on this chart, Florida being the blue line, that most of the progress happened the first 6 years of the policy, and then you see it flattens a little bit. We are still heading in the right direction, but not at the rate in which we would like to see any longer, and I really believe it's because little less leadership, less professional development and support for teachers has occurred in the state of Florida, and so that is something we are in the process of working on in Florida. Again, we're going in the right direction. We are Florida is fourth in the nation for reading performance overall, so still heading in the right direction, but we'd like to see it at a little bit accelerated pace, especially for our kids, right? Ensuring that they have the skills they need to be successful. And this chart just shows that Florida students outperform the national average in every subgroup that you see here. And I'd like to point out students with disabilities and Hispanic students, they have made the most progress when we compare it to the national averages. Yes.
Please. So this, particularly looking at the Hispanic or Latinx students, that's phenomenal, right? Yes. And I know that the racial ethnic composition down in Florida is very diverse, and the Hispanic community is very diverse. What is happening, do you think, with the instruction for Hispanic students, particularly those that are non-native English speakers? What is happening that's creating such exponential growth as a part of this policy?
So I think, one, that's a great question, and two, I think it's because we still have high expectations for them and expect them to read by the end of third grade. There are some exemptions and some similar ones in which you all have in North Carolina, and that students are exempt from the retention component if you're an ELL student that has had less than 2 years of English instruction, knowing that it could be a different, obviously, a language barrier in some form. But we expect all kids to be able to read by the end of third grade. Students with disabilities are expected to read by the end of third grade. If they're given the necessary instruction and the necessary support, they can reach that grade level mark by the end of third grade. We know that after third grade, it's extremely difficult to close the gap, and so we have to do it early possible. So prioritizing early literacy, putting all your resources in it, and making sure it occurs. We had high expectations for them too. There was no other explanation. We expected all kids to read by the end of third grade, and it was heavily communicated from our governor down. Yeah.
Dr. Arstow.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. I really like this chart, fourth grade past third grade. Do you have any information to share about eighth grade for Florida?
So I will actually, it won't be NAEP, it actually would be specific to Florida's assessment, and I will talk about that here in a little bit. I don't have it specific to NAEP today, but I can get it to you.
Because I love reading past third grade too.
Yes, good. Okay, we'll touch on that here in a little bit. And then switching over to Mississippi, again, Mississippi adopted this policy in 2013. They too have had great leadership from top down, the governor, lieutenant governor, as well as the superintendent that's in place. It's a priority in the state. And you'll see some similarities. They procured state literacy training for all teachers across their state. They chose to go with a particular type of training, which is based on the science of reading. It's the letters. It's intimately known by teachers across the nation. They're requiring it for early childhood, K-3 teachers, students, teachers of students with disabilities, and principals. So it is a required. Actually, it's not really required. It's required for their support schools, and then they found that it was popular and everyone else wanted to come, so they opened the doors for everyone in the state to participate in that training. They also have a reading coach model, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth on the next slide, and they've created a campaign to raise awareness of the importance of literacy, which I think communication can get pushed aside in respect to the importance of it. It is critically important to overly communicate about the importance of reading by the end of third grade for all stakeholders across the state. So this is the personnel that Mississippi put in place for implementation of what they call as their Literacy-Based Promotion Act. I personally prefer the name of Read to Achieve. But they have 1 state literacy director, 3 state literacy coordinators, 15 regional coordinators to support coaches as well as do coaching themselves, and then they have 75 literacy coaches within their state. Their model's a little bit different, and each coach supports two literacy support schools, so schools that have been identified in need of support, and so they do it 2 to 3 times a week in each individual school. Ideally, you have 1 coach serving 1 school, so they're part of the faculty, job-embedded professional development on a daily basis. But here's another model that may be working. They do an educator in residence model, which basically, so the coaches directly report to the department. Department's fully responsible for them. The district acts as the fiscal agent for them. And so that's a little bit different model as well, but it allows the department to have full control of their roles and responsibilities, the training in which they receive, the training in which their teachers will receive within these support schools. So it allows a little bit more support directly from the department to support these support schools. It's just a different model than Florida took on. And great things happening in Mississippi. We can no longer say, thank God for Mississippi. We've said that often, and we no longer can say that. They're making some great headway in the state of Mississippi, which is great to see. So these are their pass rates in respect to their Literacy-Based Promotion Act. They've had more kiddos pass every year of their policy, and they are actually increasing the pass score in this school year for promotion, having high expectations for their kids. And this is an example of the NAEP data for Mississippi. The bottom line represents Mississippi, and this is scale scores, but they've jumped 6 scale score points since the enactment of the policy, which we equate to about a half a grade level of improvement, to put it in an easier, understandable way, compared to the national average, which has been flat for a good long while now. So, considerations for improving Read to Achieve. I think I've probably touched on a few of those things, but I think teacher supports is probably number one in respect to this, providing teacher supports to ensure they have the knowledge and skill to teach all kiddos to read. I also would consider looking at your teacher candidate preparation program assessment. You actually do have a Foundations of Reading assessment that's required to be passed to receive certification. That's actually above and beyond some states in respect to expectations of teachers' knowledge and skill of teaching reading. But maybe it would be an idea to take a look at the cut score for passing. Might be time to raise the bar a little bit in respect to what you expect of teacher candidates exiting the teacher preparation program. Just one thing to consider. Individual reading plans. I recognize, and I don't know if you all know, but individual reading improvement plans were originally part of your legislation. And there was a conscious decision to remove that legislation over a few years ago. There was a lot of pushback within districts toward this particular part of the legislation. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't share is that I think it would be an improvement to Read to Achieve because our two states that are making the most success have this particular component as part of their policy. It basically requires any student identified with a reading deficiency K3 receive an individualized reading improvement plan that's created with the parent, so the parent can be part of the solution as well. It prescribes intervention services and supports that will be provided before, after, and during the school day. And it also would include how parents can support literacy in the home, like a contract, a tangible document that says what the school is going to do to help provide support and services to a kiddo to ensure they're reaching grade level proficiency by the end of third grade. Summer reading camps we've touched on. You have them. They are funded. And my golly, just make sure they're of quality. Make sure the best teachers are in those particular summer camps and delivering instruction to meet the needs of those kids. And lastly, something to think about is currently you all have alternative assessments for promotion. Okay, so right now there's a laundry list of alternative assessments that are allowed for promotion. And there may be a different standard for passing on these alternative assessments. I don't know that that is the case, but I think it's worth investigating. The standard for promotion should be the same across any measure that's provided for such a decision. So just something to think about is that ensuring that whatever assessment is used for a determination for promotion, that the standard that's being used is the same across all measures. So just something to think about in respect to alternative pathways for promotion. And then lastly, fourth grade and beyond was mentioned. I can't talk about fourth grade and beyond in any other state but Florida. So I come to you today to talk about Florida specifically, and it's just to show what occurred to ensure that momentum didn't end after kiddos left third grade, right? That those teachers as well as those students still need support as they face more complex text with more complex topics to be able to understand and interpret what they're reading. They still need support in reading. And so in the state of Florida, a K-12 reading allocation was created. It was created using existing funds. They were just reprioritized to emphasize and prioritize K-12 reading as important, right, in the state of Florida. And so with this movement, a comprehensive reading assessment was created for 4th through 12th grade students to measure their progress as they progress through the years and to allow teachers to use that information to inform instruction to meet the needs of those kids. Reading coach support was also put in place for the lowest performing middle school and secondary schools to support teachers with content area reading strategies as well as reading strategies if they were an English language arts or reading course. And lastly, content area professional development specific to reading was provided for any teacher that provided services and supports to students that scored at the lowest two achievement levels of our state exam. We have 5 levels, the lowest two achievement levels, which predominantly means most teachers are going to receive the content area reading professional development, because there's usually a student or 2 or 10 that a teacher is going to serve that needs support in reading at 4th grade and beyond. And this is showing FCAT data here currently, and just shows the lines going in the right direction. Since that allocation was put in place, you see progress actually began. Notice we were very flat prior to that, and then progress actually started after prioritizing literacy 4th through 12th as well. And I will get you NAEP data.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you all for
That's
having me. I
impressive.
think I've taken too much time, but any questions in which you all have, I'd love to take now.
Ms. Miller, thank you. Let me get some questions. Ms. McDevitt?
Some good recommendations. I would be interested, not for today, but the status of where we are on those recommendations, particularly as it relates to some of the things like summer camps and how we're funding those and at what level. You talked about the cut scores for those candidates. So at some point, I think good recommendations, but we have some work to do to see where we are on those recommendations.
And just as a follow-up to that, I think the funding, I'm still not clear about some of the funding for Wolfpack Reads, for summer camps, for support staff, for reading coaches.
Professional development, yeah.
Professional development. I'd like some clarity around those streams, not today, but.
Okay, well, let me do this. Let's get, assuming I'm gonna get a chance to answer this, or Dr. Shu, a few other questions for Ms. Miller, and then let's just come back and we'll have a little plan of how we're gonna develop it.
Later, yeah.
Any other questions, comments for Ms. Miller? Ms. Ford?
So I'm going to go back to the English language learners again, because I wonder if you know, and maybe it's somewhere in the data, right? If what the outcomes specifically for English language learners are, I'd like to see that, and then wondering also how ESL teachers have played into that, right? And if they're utilizing, I don't know, do you all use WIDA scores? Okay, but you probably have something comparable, right, to determine what their proficiency level is, and how we can craft a specific strategy for our English language learners as well as part of our Read to Achieve approach. I think would be very, very fruitful.
Dr. Oxendine?
One question. Beyond grade 4, just the state of Florida, or maybe this is local option, adopt a basal?
So we have an instruction materials list. There's a review and approval process, and so there's an instruction materials approval list of materials. 50% of the funds must be spent on the approved list, and then districts have discretion of the additional 50% of funds they have to purchase materials. And so no, there isn't. When this policy K3 was enacted, a comprehensive core reading program was required to be put in place to give teachers the support to deliver effective instruction, knowing that there might need supplementary support, and obviously teacher knowledge and skill matters most, right? And so the curriculum itself helps guide teachers that may not have the knowledge and skill to effectively teach the instant they come into a classroom. But really, we would encourage really to focus more so on building teacher knowledge and skill through best practices of reading versus being curriculum specific. But there is a place and time for ensuring effective curriculums in the place to support teachers with effective implementation. Yep.
Just piggybacking off of what Mr. Ford was talking about with the ESL teachers.
Yes, ma'am.
I really feel like as a beginning teacher coordinator for my school, I've really tried to talk to my beginning teachers about understanding that you should be collaborating with your ESL teachers, with your EC teachers, with the support specialists that you have, on your campus, because in our evaluation, there's actually a part where you're required to reach out to these specialists to help meet the needs of our special needs students. Well, I view special needs students as every student that walks in my door. I don't put a label on any child. I know that every single child is unique and has a specific way of learning. It is up to me as a classroom teacher to figure that out. And sometimes I can't can't do that on my own. And I sit in this chair representing not just classroom teachers, but teachers that are specialists. And so I'm proud to say that you have included it in the narrative, and I love that. And I just hope that we can continue, again, to fund these positions. I know that we have reading specialists at our school, and we lost the funding for that 2 years ago. So we no longer have a reading specialist at our schools. That's sad. So we need that funding and that support. So thank you for continuing to put that out there, and hopefully people will listen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's go Mr. Duncan and then Ms. White.
My question has to do with standards. So when you were doing your comparison, how did you evaluate our North Carolina 3rd and 4th grade standards as compared to Florida? Were they ours more rigorous? Were they equal? What was the baseline for in your research around our standards?
So, good question. I haven't looked at North Carolina specific standards in the time in which you all had specific standards in comparison to what Florida had in place when this policy was enacted. And I think that's a great question for me to explore a little bit further. Currently, I can talk about the state of Florida did adopt what we no longer call Common Core standards. They were adopted, they were refined, and now we have Florida standards. What I do know is the standards that were adopted were better and had higher expectations for kids than our former standards. But I don't know the comparison in respect to when Florida adopted this policy and compared those to when you all adopted this policy. I haven't done that, but it's definitely something worth exploring. Sorry, I can't address that question. Yeah.
Yeah. And my second question, with your consistent, I guess, attention given to literacy coaching, it'd be interesting to hear from Dr. Petrie Martin and Pam Chu to hear about how those literacy coaches are being embedded into our regional supports, and funding made available through those regional models. So you can't answer that, but they can at a later time, because I'm sensitive to your agenda.
Thank
and I know we're
Thank you.
running. So, hey, that's my query. Table it and bring it back another time.
I've got it captured. I got the list captured. Mr. Duncan.
On the slide where you had the disaggregated groups for the I think it was the 4th grade reading from the NAEP test, you did not have the white student group disaggregated, so I couldn't tell from that slide whether there's been any.
We have all students below, but that's a good, actually, I'm glad you pointed it out. So we should add them.
And so because of that, I was interested whether or not the work and the changes have led to any closing of the achievement gap, and I was interested in that, but couldn't really tell from the data that was up there. And do you have any information on that?
I can definitely get you some, Mr. Duncan. I don't have it off the top, but I definitely can get you some. We've every subgroup in which in the state of Florida has made progress. I just clearly didn't delineate white on the board here. So.
Thank you. I would appreciate seeing that data. So
All right. Thank you. Ms. Miller, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for your time.
Appreciate the time. I've got a running list here. Let me just summarize some of the interests coming out of this, and remember that we do have another conversation later today with some folks on these issues. We have some continuing questions about our K-12 reading policy that we're going to address, and the department has already talked in a prior conversation about putting those issues on the table. We've got questions about the funding structure of Read to Achieve, our summer camps. We heard last time we've had a significant fall off in the number of kids attending, so I'm assuming we have got pretty significant dollars that we're leaving on the table for instruction that aren't being spent on reading camps. We've got questions about quality control of reading camps. We've got questions related to our standards, as well as the reading coach infrastructure that we saw in Mississippi and Florida, and how it relates to any kind of coaching infrastructure we're putting together. I don't think we have anything like the reading coach numbers. We've got a pilot, Wolfpack Works. That's my starting list. We've got some questions about also performance, not just performance of some of our subgroups, but what specific policies we'd want to look at and interventions to ensure that policy and practice is focused on specific needs. Superintendent, I cut you off a little bit early. Do you want to make any other comments on the Read to Achieve.
I was going to agree with Ms. Willoughby on funding and maybe looking a few years back as well as implementation. What happened in this building when we started off on the steps of Read to Achieve, where there might have been some missteps that were made.
Great. So we've got, I think, a fair amount of work still ahead of us. Given how important this issue is to our General Assembly and the importance of robust implementation of this, I appreciate the chairman asking Cecilia to create an opportunity for Kerry to talk with our education chairs. And so House and Senate schedules are in flux a little bit, but we've made Kerry available to House and Senate chairs to talk about some implementation improvements that we could be looking at in the state, where we could be in partnership with the legislature. And I think that's going to happen in just a little bit. All right. Mr. Chairman, I know you've given me the evil eye, so we're going to keep moving.
You have 1 hour.
On the agenda, I know, and I'm good
Use
for it.
it wisely.
And I'm good for it.
I need 3 minutes of it.
All right, we're going to move to our action on first reading items. The first, SLA 1 and SLA 2, will both involve standards revision. We're just looking at action on the process right now. But I think we're going to get good. Ms. Lynchy?
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, members and advisors to the board. I'm joined today by Ms. Beverly Vance. She's our section chief for K-12 Mathematics, Science, and STEM. Beverly, if you'll stand, please. And also members of her team, including our high school consultants, Ms. Lisa Ash and Mr. Joseph Reaper, as well as the rest of the math team, Ms. Tammy Lackey and Ms. Denise Schultz, who have supported this work that we're bringing for you today. I want to thank Ms. Vance and her team for their commitment to facilitating the development of excellent standards for students in our state. So as Mr. Buxton indicated, we're here today to provide an update on 4th level mathematics standards review, and we are asking for your approval to move forward with the revision process for these standards. This request is in alignment with the Standard Course of Study Policy 012 that this board approved last March of 2018. And this policy provides a uniform process, a formalized system based on 4 guiding principles that standards for any content area are feedback-based, research-informed, improvement-oriented, and process-driven. The department continues to work diligently to ensure that there are a variety of options for students that align to their plans after high school graduation, whatever those plans may be, career, community college, or technical school, or college. And for mathematics, in alignment with the State Board high school graduation requirements, we take into account options aligned to students' post-high school plans. So under the tenets of implementation science, the standards for 4th level math have been in the exploration phase to research and inform recommendations for content development. As I mentioned, we're requesting approval to move forward with the revision process. We're working toward a final set of standards we anticipate in summer of 2019. The 2019-20 school year would be used for installation of the standards, which includes development of aligned assessments, as well as internal and external training on the new standards, materials and selection alignment, and development of support tools for school systems and charters to use to inform their local curriculum implementation. Implementation of the standards would take place in the 2021 school year. So to give you an idea of the time frame. As I mentioned, we align our activities under the tenets of implementation science, and today we're going to focus on the box titled Research and Evaluation so we can share with you what we have done to bring us to this point with these recommendations today. The picture you see before you represents the collection of feedback. We collect feedback from educators, administrators, parents, students, institutes of higher ed, business and industry representatives, national organizations, and other education agencies. And this is critical to promoting transparency and ensuring that we have feedback to the revision of standards for any content area. These pictures capture stakeholders having conversations about the standards. You will see a chart from the data review team on the right of the screen. They began exploring what should be considered for 4th level math when they were reviewing content for standards for math 1 through 3.
So the next couple of slides just give you a timeline of the research and evaluation that has informed our recommendations. This shows you how research and evaluation is used throughout the standards revision process, and during this phase, exploration, we've used surveys, focus groups, the data review committee for all aspects of standards review and to inform recommendations for standards development. So as you saw on the previous slide, the data review team discussed content considerations during the development of our current Math 1 through 3. Exploration has included conversations about multiple pathways for students to receive math content beyond Math 1 through 3, and this includes options such as existing AP and IB coursework, CTE courses or pairings of CTE courses, as well as continued collaboration with the community college system to meet the requirements of the Career and College Ready graduates legislation. In the spring of 2017, during NC Math 1 through 3 implementation, focus groups were conducted with the North Carolina Collaborative for Mathematics, and based on the content in Math 1 through 3 courses, teachers provided feedback on the desired content for Level 4 courses. The North Carolina Early Math Placement Test Board consists of deans from the university and community college system and their math departments. And in October 2017, this group surveyed the content in the current math courses and provided feedback for the development of 4th level math. During October and November of 2017, information gathered from the teachers and the dean's focus groups was presented to curriculum leaders and lead teachers for feedback and suggestions at the North Carolina Council for Teachers of Mathematics Conference. In February 2018, we received extensive research results on current 4th level mathematics courses, and this was part of a Math and Science Partnership Grant, and it was led under the direction of Dr. Holt Wilson at UNCG to compare student performance in current 4th level math courses to how students performed in their entry-level college courses in the UNC system. The study included longitudinal data with 3 cohorts of students, and it examined how they performed in school and how it prepared them once they entered into a freshman level course in college. The report gave us lots of good information to inform what courses would best prepare students as a 4th level math. In spring of 2018, the consultants conducted an in-depth exploration of the current 4th level courses to identify areas of overlap, or with the adopted Math 1 through 3 courses, they completed a crosswalk for advanced functions of modeling, or AFM, discrete mathematics, and pre-calculus, and they crosswalked that to Math 1 through 3. Additional analysis of standards options in other states, relevant assessments, usefulness of the courses, and feedback from external stakeholders and the business community took place. I'm wrapping up the research part. Just hang with me one more slide. We're to the fall of 2018 now. We continued collecting feedback through surveys and focus groups, reactions to the crosswalks that I just described, and on the desired courses and the content that should be included. The data was analyzed for trends to determine what stakeholders felt was most important. Content receiving the highest ratings was compared to current course offerings to determine course recommendations. And of course, receiving stakeholder feedback is continuous and ongoing throughout the process. So we're just in the review process right now. We want your permission to move forward with revision. So based on the data gathered through the Data Review Committee, the focus groups, surveys, research, and reviews, we are requesting approval from the board to move forward with these 4 recommendations. We want to recommend that we modify the current pre-calculus course, that we modify discrete mathematics and connect this to programming and coding standards, and change the name to discrete mathematics for computer science. We would like to recommend creating an NC Math 4 course that includes extended content that goes beyond algebra and extended content, in algebra and functions, statistics and probability, and other topics that extend from North Carolina Math 1 through 3. And additionally, we would like to recommend that we phase out the advanced functions and modeling course because of redundancy in course content that is found in Math 1 through 3. So in closing, this is our update on where we are with the standards review process. We are requesting your approval to move forward with revision. We propose bringing updates to the board through the Friday updates, as well as including opportunities for you to be notified about drafts for input and review, and upon request, making formal presentations to the board. We anticipate bringing a final draft by June of 2019 to request approval in July, as well as to share ongoing plans for supporting our districts and charters in successful implementation. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Lynch-Ebert. Let me just remind folks, this will be action on first read. We are approving the process to continue moving forward. We'll have actual standards
To
approval
respond to, yes.
and then implementation, installation to follow. Just any questions about this item?
Quick
Dr.
question.
Oxenheim.
Thank you, Christy. My question goes back to the previous slide. You made reference to a study that was conducted by someone at UNC Greensboro.
Dr. Holt Wilson.
Did
Yes.
we hear that report?
We can provide a copy of that report to you if you would like.
I'd love it, because it has something to do with the relationship between Math 4 and preparation for entry math college level, right?
Yes.
I'm interested in that.
Any other questions? Ms.
My
Wilby?
question will take 30 seconds of your 1 hour you've been allotted to say thank you. If anybody ever thinks that North Carolina doesn't have a good process in place for reviewing standards, I refer them to Christy. I mean, we do.
She didn't wake up yesterday and decide we need to revise the fourth level math.
I think sometimes people think that way, so this is great to have this. I appreciate the presentation.
The questions? Okay, we'll vote on this tomorrow, action on first read. Ms. Lynch-Ebert, thank you very much. All right. SLA 2 is another action on first read, revised standards for information and technologies, K-12. And I think we have Ms. Deborah Goodman.
Good morning. Thank you. I am Deborah Goodman, lead from Digital Teaching and Learning. I'm really excited to be before you today to discuss the information and technology essential standards for students. As the Lieutenant Governor mentioned in the January State Board meeting, we've been on a journey with Digital Teaching and Learning. And when he said that, I had flashbacks to the Apple computer in my room with the floppy disk drive. Some of you probably remember that. To multiple computers in my room, to actually creating the first web page for my classroom, because I saw the great potential for my students to have an audience outside the classroom. And I was one of the first to have that in my school and district. So been on this journey for a long time with integrating technology appropriately. So in North Carolina, we are very fortunate to have had key legislation in place to support preparing educators for digital learning, providing digital resources, and then ensuring technology access across all of our schools. Our North Carolina Digital Learning Plan has provided recommendations for state action that support K-12 schools as they transition to digital age learning, providing districts with resources to ensure that local technology and digital learning plans align with and support instructional best practices, are implemented by highly skilled teachers, and lead to personalized learning experiences for all students. So today I'm here to provide an update on the standards process for our information and technology essential standards. You may see that as ITES throughout the presentation. We also refer to it as ITES. And to request approval to move forward with the revision process of these standards as recommended by the Information Technology Essential Standards Steering Committee. So that's a mouthful. In the spring of 2018, we convened a steering committee composed of district leaders, classroom teachers, and educational partners. This committee acts as advisors, as they do on other standards committees, and planners to inform the implementation of the revised standards. We've met monthly face-to-face or either virtually since April of 2018. In alignment to the standards review process that Christy spoke about earlier, we have been engaged in the review phase, which involved the gathering and synthesizing of feedback from various stakeholders via multiple surveys and focus groups, gathered research on what other states were doing, and as well as national technology standards for students. So we kind of conducted a lay of the land, so to speak. This work, like other standards, as you see here, aligns with the implementation science framework, and we're in the early exploration stage. We surveyed various groups across the state, as outlined in the review process: classroom teachers, instructional support, administrators, district level leaders, as well as parents, students, business community members, and other state agencies. In one survey to media and technology directors, 76% of those respondents felt that the current information technology and essential standards needed revision. In response to has your LEA adopted any national standards in addition to information and technology essential standards, almost 30% reported they had adopted the ISTE national standards for students. ISTE is the International Society for Technology and Education, and they have several sets of standards for leaders, teachers, and also students and others. 9% of these respondents had adopted AASL standards, and those are American Association of School Librarians. Almost 2% had adopted the International Association for K-12 Online Learning, also known as INACOL. We found through our research that many states are adopting the ISTE national standards for students, or at the very least are using or have used those standards to inform development of their state standards. The chart on the left shows you the states that have adopted ISTE standards. The map on the right does not match what's on the left. What it shows you on the right is how many of those states have officially adopted the revised 2016 ISTE standards. So there's still a few states that have not taken on the new updated 2016 standards. As you know, House Bill 23 directed the State Board to develop and implement digital teaching and learning standards for school administrators and classroom teachers. Those went into effect July 2017. And I share this because the ISTE standards for educators and leaders were used to inform the work on the development of these competencies. Our committee has been looking extensively into the ISTE standards for students to see how they might inform our work moving forward. As you can see from this chart, adapted from ISTE, there has been an evolution of technology over the past 2 decades. We've moved from learning to use technology to using technology to learn to transforming the learning with technology. Across North Carolina schools, we have observed changes in the environment in which technology is utilized. Who is teaching it, how it's used in instruction, and the ability to reach out to a wider audience, which is bringing experiences to our students that would not have been available 20 years ago. Our current information and technology essential standards were developed in 2009, about a decade ago, and fully implemented in the 2011-2012 school year. In alignment with our newly revised North Carolina Standard Course of Study review, revision, and implementation process, standards are to be reviewed for each content area every 5 to 7 years to ensure our standards are clear and relevant. During the review process, the steering committee, utilizing the data pulled from other state and national technology standards, compared our information technology essential standards to the needs of the current landscape and could see gaps specifically in the area of digital citizenship. When we talk about social media, the digital footprint, which now starts before birth, and then their participation in an online global community. Also the 4 C's, creativity, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking. I might also throw in there curation and consumption. So it'd be more than 4 C's now. The committee also compared language from the ISTE National Standards for Students to our current information and technology essential standards, where the focus has been more tool and skill driven versus pedagogy and a learner driven application of technology. Based on extensive research, data compiled from multiple surveys and focus groups, and the needs of today's students to be successful in career, college, and whatever path they take in life, the committee recommends that the current standards be revised. So in closing, we request approval to move forward with the revision process for these standards. Our goal, provided we receive approval to move forward, is to have a draft available for you in June of 2019. Pending approval of that draft, installation would be in the 2019-2020 school year, and full implementation would be in the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you, Ms. Goodman. Questions? Also action on first read, also approval of a process. Thank you.
Okay,
got it done. Thank you, Ms. Goodman. All right, we will look at SLA 3 and 4, and I'm gonna, y'all hold your seats for right now, because these are items we've had before, and I'm gonna see if we have any questions, and if not, we'll move past the presentations. SLA 3 is the amendment to our board policy on advanced courses satisfying graduation requirements. You'll remember 2 Math IB courses and the now famous AP World History course that some people up here have taught. And we had some questions about it. This again just amends and adds those into our graduation requirement policy. This is for action. Let me see if anyone would like to have any further discussion on this item. Okay, so we'll have that back with us tomorrow. SLA 4 is our course for credit. You might remember this is about combining college courses that don't individually qualify for course credit and combining those so we can get course credit for high school. We had this actually in the consent agenda last time. Some questions came up from an LEA that we thought were worth investigating a little bit further. Those questions have been satisfied, to my understanding, and this item is back before us for action. So again, we've had this presentation and discussion a couple months back. Let me see again if we have any questions that folks would like to explore with staff. Okay. Seeing any or hearing any, we will come back to SLA 4 tomorrow as an action item. We have one more new business item, and this is what says state assessment update on here. We all saw the press release of the state superintendent and department's actions looking to reduce testing in the state and reduce test anxiety. And there are a number of actions, and we've asked the superintendent and his team to give us an overview of this effort, kind of help us understand the strategic approach, make sure you have questions satisfied about implications and what each of these pieces will mean, where there are state policy and board policy considerations, so that there are actions and there will be that will come before the board. You have a good understanding of the entire strategy before we start looking at individual pieces. So as we bring up Dr. Hall and Dr. Howard, Mr. Superintendent, if you want to make any opening comments before they get in the presentation, I'd welcome those.
I just want to again thank Dr. Hall and Dr. Howard for all of your help in making this possible. It's taken months, but this was a very good first step, and I'm excited about the next steps of this as well. As we've been talking about, personalized learning is going to be a huge step in completely transforming our testing system. But more immediate steps are also, I've already met with Jack Hoke, the executive director of NC Superintendents Association, and we're really going to dig into this with the local superintendents at our next quarterly meeting. So I look forward to that conversation as well.
Good. And board members, I'll scan you all as you have questions. There are lots of issues that come up throughout this presentation, so if you have questions, just let me know and we'll break it and get them done. Rob.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, members of the board and the advisory. Appreciate this opportunity to stand before you today and talk about some of these recent announcements and where we're heading in our testing program here in the state of North Carolina. Before I ask Dr. Howard to come up and kind of give the real technical overview of what these changes mean, I just want to jump right into the recommendations and really the announcements that were made and help to really unpack those for you as a board. So one of the first things that came out in our announcement, and we've been spending some time, you may recall we started a discussion back at the retreat over at North Carolina Central. We started talking about the state's testing program. We talked about how we were moving forward with the Innovative Assessment Authority and that application to the U.S. Department of Education. So we've been, again, starting to engage in this dialogue about where do we go in test reductions here in North Carolina. So if we look at this first one, when we talk about reducing the length of required tests, some of the immediate actions that our teachers and our students are going to see this year is that we're reducing an hour on the EOG in math for grades 3 through 8. Those are things that will happen this year. In addition, we're going to see an hour reduction in test time for the biology EOC, but also on the science EOG in grades 5 and 8. Again, hour reduction in those testing times. Something that you're going to see going into next year is we'll start to see the same implications in our ELA end of grade exam or end of grade assessments. Again, an hour reduction. This goes back, and again, Dr. Howard's going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but this has to do with when we did revisions to our standards and how when we roll out assessments to align with those standards, why this timing kind of works the way that it is with math this year and moving into the ELA next year. When we talk about test stress, we talk about how do we create the conditions through things like our test administration guide. How do we start to look at language and conditions that we can set through that manual or through that information for our teachers around making local choices at the district and school level around using proctors? Looking at how do we create the conditions through that guide to allow teachers and schools to decide when to dismiss students from the classroom setting during testing, once testing is complete. Looking at even something that we had in the manual before was, teachers were not allowed to actually go back and look at testing strategies before test administration. We see that again as a tool where teachers and students can engage in dialogue to hopefully help reduce some of that, that stress and anxiety before taking the assessment. Looking at reducing the number of locally required tests. We know from the conversations that we've had and the data that we looked at, districts are using assessments on the local level for a number of things, and it all provides great support to our teachers in knowing where students are in their progress. It's critical. We understand that. But we're also, just like we're doing here at the state level, how do we work with our districts as a partner to say, let's take a look at what we're doing in our testing programs as a whole. We're doing it at the state level, inviting them into that same conversation on the local level to see if there's any assessment strategies that can be used to reduce testing, again, locally, where things that might be duplicative or things that potentially may not align to standards or other purposes that assessments might be used for. And again, we've got some great examples of some districts that are doing some of that work already in North Carolina. And again, Dr. Howard will talk about that in more detail in her discussion. If we're looking at assessments on the federal level and things that we can do that potentially allow the state to make decisions around testing reductions, things that again are not part of our federal requirements, where do we engage in a discussion? Really start to have some collaborative conversations, not only with the board, but with our stakeholders across North Carolina, including our districts and our educators, to see are there some other assessments that we can consider eliminating over time. You'll hear some discussion today around final exams. That is one area that we've continued to talk about. And so where do we look at those things that are part of existing policy, whether here at the state board or in the General Assembly, that we need to have some discussions on and see, based on the feedback that we get going forward, where do we make some good decisions on behalf of students and our teachers and our schools across the state. We're also going to take some time to start looking at what are some ways that we help parents understand other options for not getting this sense of everything is so dependent on just this one test. We have opportunities where alternative assessments can be used. We have options where some districts and schools are taking advantage of summer programs so that students can go back and reassess if they need to. How do we make sure that those options are well understood by all parents and people can take advantage of those options when they need them for their students? Again, looking at multiple options so that everything does not create this condition of just being dependent on that one day of testing. So again, all things that go into creating those conditions that we're hoping to do over time. And then this last one to me really goes back to how do we look at building on the great work that we've done with the NC check-ins and potentially look at a through assessment model or other things that lead us in the direction of, kind of merging what does it mean to have an accountability system with achievement scores that are required at the federal level, but doing it in a way that we can kind of build in some of those conversations about progress monitoring so that teachers get feedback throughout the year and hopefully get that innovative assessment authority granted at the U.S. Department of Education level, not because it's going to be the silver bullet for all things, but it helps to unfreeze the landscape for us to have a deeper discussion about how do we build and potentially reform some of our assessment programs here in North Carolina to take us into that next chapter of assessments here in our state. So looking forward to the conversation today with you, but I wanted to kind of go through that at the beginning of today's discussion and really set the stage for the technical components that Dr. Howard is going to take us through now, and look forward to more conversation throughout the presentation. Dr. Howard.
Thank you, Dr. Hall.
Good morning. So as Dr. Hall said, we always begin with the adoption of content standards. And this board adopted new content standards for English language arts and mathematics in 2017. So the clock starts ticking on developing those assessments for implementation in our schools across the state. And as part of that process, what we do is we actually convene teachers across the state to give their input on the recommendations for the specifications for those assessments. And in those conversations, we're determining things and having discussions and getting input on the number of items for each content standard, meaning what are the most important content standards, which content standards should have more items than possibly some of those other content standards. But it is a work in process that begins with those field tests, test specification meetings. They go through on after the field test, where our team collects the information and reviews those test specifications, and finally determine, as we begin to build the actual test, which we have done this year for mathematics, okay, how many items are we going to have on the assessment? So all of those conversations are very focused and trying to make sure that we are attending to those terms that we all like to use, sometimes interchangeably, validity and reliability. But also important, which we do not talk as much about, is the classification consistency, and that is to do with the academic achievement levels, which sometimes are referred to as cut scores, but we try to say academic achievement levels. Currently in the state, of course, we have 5 academic achievement levels. And our psychometricians, and Dr. Kinga-Mabella is with us here today, they attend to those details, and they're the ones that we go to and we say, okay, this is the discussion, this is what's being considered. Can we do this? How can we do this and maintain the technical soundness of these assessments, which we're held to by our own professional ethics through the American Psychological Association standards, but also through the U.S. Department of Education. So at the completion of administering these assessments this year in mathematics and doing an alignment study for the content and setting the achievement levels, recommending those to you for approval, and once those are approved and everything has been done, we send a huge amount of evidence to the U.S. Department of Education, and they comb through those assessments and all of that information to determine whether or not they will say that North Carolina has valid and reliable assessments. It's a very, very thorough process, which gives us the assurance that our assessments are, those words we like to use, valid and reliable, and they also look at the classification consistency for those academic achievement levels. So as we go through this process over the next several months, in August we'll be coming back to you with a recommendation which will be yielded from our panels of teachers who we will convene with an external facilitator. We do not facilitate those meetings. Teachers across the state convene, and an external facilitator will walk them through the standard setting process. And as much as I'd like to talk a great deal about standard setting, because I find it fascinating, and I think it's very important for everyone to understand, I will say that standard setting on the assessments, those cut scores, are grounded in the content standards. And that is much of the work that those teachers do, and reviewing those content standards and then asking themselves, what should students in North Carolina know and be able to do if they're at each one of those academic achievement levels. So determining the number of those achievement levels is a conversation that we had really beginning last spring, just bringing it up internally with ourselves and with some of our colleagues in the agency of saying, okay, so North Carolina had 4 achievement levels for many years. We then shifted to 5 in 2013. But if we remember, the original standard setting process was set on 4. And then we went back and added a standard error to the previous level 3 and made it a new level 3. And then level 3 became level 4, and level 4 became level 5. So it seemed like a responsible question to pose and say, do we want to continue with 5 or do we want to have 4? Now the interesting thing is that the number of items you have impacts the number of achievement levels. So this slide is just showing where these intersect. And what they intersect in is being able to say reliably, or the preferred terminology from Dr. Mabella is classification consistency. That we can say with confidence that a level 3 student has performed on that assessment and demonstrated that they are indeed a level 3. So the more items that you have, the more achievement levels you can have. And just think about it as a candy bar. If you're dividing a candy bar, and the more that are sharing in that candy bar, then the smaller their piece is going to be. Well, the fewer items we have on a test, then the less confidence we're going to have that that student has actually demonstrated their qualification for that achievement level. So that's why the two are so very, very related. And
will you back up and say that again?
Yeah. So
but I know where she's thinking about. There was some misunderstanding.
You don't know where I'm thinking about. I just want to.
This will be.
No, I know exactly.
Hold on a second. This will be.
I just wanted to repeat
please.
that.
So, with the candy bar?
Which, no. What part do you want her to repeat?
That, just that very last part
That very
about
last
the
piece.
fewer, the more items, the more achievement levels. I mean, the candy bar and metaphor is a good one for me.
Yes, yes, exactly. So the more items, then we can have more achievement levels. That's correct. But remember, our goal is to have as little testing time as possible. So we're trying to hit that sweet spot of having that classification consistency, having confidence in that, with not testing students any more than we possibly have to. And I think that's why the next slide is so important, okay? Because it wasn't possible to reduce the number of items on the test and maintain 5 levels. In fact, to maintain 5 levels, from a technical perspective, we actually would have to have conversations about making the test longer.
Thank you. That's what I was.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate
So can
it.
I just a quick translation? So whether we wanted to keep 5 levels or not, with the number of items we're going to now, that's not possible. So we're going to need to go to 4 to have consistent classification consistency.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. Because in the development, in the specifications, which this work has been going on for quite some time, we have those conversations. They're technical conversations, and we got to the point that we built those tests to have 4 academic achievement levels, and they will still have classification consistency.
This is a really simplistic question that probably points to my lack of psychometric understanding. So, if you can tell us this, how many items do you reduce to get a 1-hour reduction in testing and therefore 4 levels rather than 5? How many items are reduced? Is that too stupid to ask?
No, it's a very good
I
question.
think all questions are good.
It's a very good question, and there are some subsequent slides that show the actual number of items. And I think Dr. Hall mentioned this is an important piece to remember. We look also at the timing data, okay? So the number of items is just not also, well, the length of the test is not just the number of items. It's also looking at data on how long it actually takes students to complete the assessments.
Right.
Okay, so all of that, so it becomes a very complex conversation. It's not just one thing, okay? Now one point that we have made recently internally in our conversations is we're really at the threshold. We can't go any lower, okay? And even though the U.S. Department of Education only requires 3 levels, we would not really be, and if we were to go to 3 levels and reduce the number of items, we would not be able to assess the breadth and depth of the content standards as required by federal law. So it's not just one piece of information, it's several pieces of information that have to come together. But I think the important thing to remember is that our responsibility with our psychometricians and with our team and working with Dr. Hall is to make sure that we maintain those technical standards and that we try to do so in as little time as possible for the students. And I will share that in looking at the science, okay, we saw really the students were not using the 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to stopping, which is what this process is all about, rather than just continuing doing what you're doing. This opens the door. We have new standards. We have new assessments. We go back to those conversations, and that's how we got here.
Superintendent?
And a lot of work has gone into this with the science. I thank you very much. We had a lot of conversations about the science before we went down this path. But I also want to take it back and say a lot of this started with listening to teachers and parents and students. And I myself, last spring, proctored one of these EOCs, and I saw the room for myself with the amount of time that students had in between when they actually finished and when they were actually able to get back to a normal sense of a school day. It's also where I heard about, with talking with that 4th grade teacher, about the policy that restricted her from going over test-taking strategies with her students before the test. So that's one I really sank my teeth into as well. So this is all the science. I just want people to remember this is also responding to what we're hearing from teachers and students and parents as well.
Mr. McDevitt, and then we'll keep going through. There's a lot of media information.
Dr. Howard, as it relates to this, not all the other I've slept since then, so it's been a few years since we went to these 5. But the 5 were achievement levels were recommended by this department, and you were part of that conversation at the time. I know I can remember Lou Fabrizio when we asked. He said, but the psychometricians are recommending against the 4. The department, I may be overstating that, so help me with that. But you and others did recommend those 5 achievement levels. What's changed? I mean, I do get we have more data in terms of use of the time. I hear the interrelated and how all that matters, but what has changed?
So I think that's an excellent question, and you are correct. We did recommend those 5 to this board. And at the time we said those 5 were, and actually, if I can correct myself a little bit, we first of all recommended the 4. And the 4 were approved. I'm thinking I remember that. No, and then we came back and did the standard error around the 3.
Yeah.
That's right. So initially, it was the 4, and the 4 was what came out of standard setting. So at that point in time, the psychometricians were supportive.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's also a little bit of dialogue about, I won't say arguing, but about the validity of, or the rigor of the 3s. You remember whether you were a high 3 or a low 3, a high 2 or a low 3 was all, there was a lot of conversation about that. And I don't want to replay where I was on that because I was somewhere other than where you were. But I would like to know how, you're beginning to tell us how that's changed.
Right.
What's different today?
Right. So I think the difference is we have the same feedback that the superintendent and all of you have, that the test is considered too long, particularly for our elementary students, that they have fatigue. Now, we've done analysis that shows that students perform the same way at the beginning of the test as they do at the end of the test. But when we have those conversations with a parent or a teacher, I do not think they're impressed with our data. So I think our responsibility is to always be mindful of where we are. And our first obligation is to do this in the most efficient, clean way that we possibly can. And so I think it was very responsible of everyone involved to say, can these tests be shorter? And the important thing to remember is to maintain that technical quality. And the answer is we can. And if we had continued with 5, we would have been before you today saying, or in August, because really this comes to you in August after standard setting, and we would have, you may not have known it necessarily because you would have been focusing on the scale scores and the academic achievement levels, but we would have added items to the test. And so potentially the testing time could have extended. It may not have. When I say items, I don't necessarily mean 20. You know, it could be just a few, but nevertheless, it could have lengthened the test if we had maintained the 5.
I think what would be good, looking at time, is to go ahead and do a quick overview of what these 4 levels could look like. We are not voting on this tomorrow or next month. This comes after a lot of psychometric analysis. But just to get a sense of what road this takes us down, and then we'll come back later, and then let's make sure we hit on some of the other implications. We can look at the number of test items and then some of the implications on final exams.
Okay.
Since that will come.
Right. Thank you. So this is the timeline, and I'll let you digest that, but it is aligned with the implementation of the new assessments. And this is the existing 5 academic achievement levels that we have, and this is showing what is being recommended, which is a system of still using the nomenclature of 5, 4, 3, 2. And that is because that is what everybody understands. And to roll everybody back to 4, 3, 2, 1 would be what we have heard, and we have asked, you know, in the field, our contacts in the field, and their feedback has been, and their concern, I think, that has bubbled up, is that they would be very concerned about the confusion, and they would rather actually stay with 5, 4, 3, 2. Now, some of the, and I realize as I'm looking, I think I've got my level numbers wrong, but one thing that is for more discussion is what we actually call those levels. If we call them accelerated versus in advanced versus college and career, or career and college, that is something that when we come in August with the recommendation of the actual scale score for each one of these, that is something that at that time can always be changed. So we're looking at other states and seeing what they call these levels. We're having these conversations. Maintaining level 3 as grade level proficient is very key, partly due to read to achieve. And maintaining level 5 is very key because there is now state law that says level 5 students are then assured that they have that next higher math opportunity. And so you can just see with those two pieces that it's really better to maintain 5, 4, 3, 2. And I must admit, we're kind of technical, so it took us a while to get used to that. But we recently just had an aha moment and said, you know, really, this can work. So the testing time, and this is just, and I think Dr. Hall already addressed this, I will share with you NC Math 1 and NC Math 3. The timing data is not support reducing the time of those assessments at this time. That is something we'll keep our eye on, and we'll keep looking at the data and seeing if we can ever do that. But that's a good example of we're not going to reduce time if we think that we can't stand behind it, because we're the ones that ultimately have to stand behind it. The next slide is the number of items that we talked about. And I think, again, you have to remember this doesn't look like a large number of items, but it is enough to get us where we want to go. And remember, we're always also talking about the timing data. Okay. The next couple of slides are just federal required tests and state required tests. And that takes us, of course, to NC final exams.
So let me just make one comment, just for the board. The action to reduce test items, that's an administrative action that the board, the department in carrying out the testing system in the state can make decisions about. The policy item for us is going to be around the 4 levels, because it puts us in a place where we've got to be at 4 instead of 5. So we've got to make some decisions later about that, just to flag.
Yeah, but this is helpful
impact.
so we understand it, because you can't understand one without the other. So that's good. Thanks.
Right. So then, North Carolina final exams, which will be an item that is going to come to us in preceding months.
August.
Succeeding months, excuse me.
That is correct. And Dr. Tom Tomberlin is here as well, available for any questions or comments that he may have around this. This first slide just kind of walks us through the background of where NC final exams came from. And as we all know, they came from Race to the Top. There was a requirement to have that information available for all teachers. And we developed NC final exams. We also developed analysis of student work. The analysis of student work was eliminated. The NC final exams, we were never given the directive to eliminate the NC final exams. So the question then becomes, well, where is it written that NC final exams exist? It is in state board policy. They are not cited in state law. And looking at some of the state law, we can see it could generalize somewhat because it makes references to EVOS, and from the NC final exams, that is where we get the EVOS data. Standard 6, which was using that information, of course, was eliminated. There are 5 other standards in the teacher evaluation. The information from their growth, their historical growth, could always be, considered as in developing conversations with that teacher on how they can improve their instruction. So looking at the number of teachers that use NC final exams for their EVOS, you can see the numbers here on the slide, so I won't walk through them, but you can see the circle on the right shows the EVOS that is from federal or state mandated tests. The ones through NC final exams is the darkest, and then that small white area is through CTE assessments. So breaking it down even further on this chart, if you'll go to the far right column, this is for grade 4 and 5, for science and social studies grade 4 and social studies at grade 5. And these are the number of teachers that have an EVOS rating using only these NCFEs. So as you can see, it's a very small number, especially compared to the overall number of teachers that are getting EVOS information. And then if you put it in a student context, you can see here the number of students that are taking each one of these assessments. And you can see the social studies is very low, the science is about double of that, and that may very well be because there is a grade 5 science EOG that they're attending to.
Let me stop there for a second, just get any questions.
Pardon?
Just let me get any questions we have about final exams here. So there will be something, and the reason why you're seeing these is we'll have an item potentially that's gonna come before the board on eliminating these final exams. And so I'd ask for any questions about the final exams. And then let me do this as folks are thinking about, are these the only final exams that the department is looking at bringing to us for elimination, or are we talking about a broader sweep of final exams?
I can say that right now, for me to bring to the board would just be these 3 exams, because these are grades where students are already taking another EOG, so while the numbers might not look high in the scheme of 1.5 million students, this is over testing. Now, you will have a handful of teachers that don't have EVOS, but I think in the scheme of wanting to reduce testing, it is a good move. I think the broader conversation of NC final exams is probably one that we should have as well with stakeholders, the General Assembly, and really ask, are we getting the data we want with the requirement of that test? I actually ran into a teacher at lunch one day, and he was a history teacher, and he said something very interesting. He says, look, if you take away the NC final exams, I'm still going to give a test because I'm a high school history teacher. I'm still going to. But one of the gripes with the NC final exam, and I actually have one with me, the history test. Thank you, Dr. Howard. I read it myself end to end. It's a reading assessment. And I'd love to hear from Principal Wallace. I mean, it is a reading assessment. And we have to have a conversation. Are we getting an accurate EVOS score on a history teacher when that history teacher is focused on, teaching the fundamental? I mean, we want more civics education in our classrooms, but then we're testing on, here's a passage, answer a question from what you read in the passage. Here's a passage, answer the question. I mean, it is a reading assessment, which is important, but I think we should start that conversation of where do we go with NC final exams?
Along those same lines, there's been a lot of criticism in recent years about if you don't test it, you don't spend much time teaching it. And there's been sort of correlated to that, there's been a lot of criticism having to do with the civics awareness of students coming out of school these days. In the social studies in particular, have drawn a lot of commentary. Did your group, as you studied this, were there comments relating to those topics or issues?
No, sorry, we are just scratching the surface, and this is a board policy. So I think this is one of those ones that we can do an issue session, really dig into. But this also, we want to hear from local superintendents. We want to hear from the General Assembly, because this started with, this has growth information that they may want to see, but it's not required by law. So I think that's a conversation worth having.
Okay, so Mr. Duncan, this is one of those that will come back to us for discussion and action, most likely, I assume. Maybe changes depending on what you get from the field, but this is slated to come to us. So I think that's a question that at the appropriate time we'll want to make sure we can address. I think, Mr. Wallace, had a comment? No?
No, I was going to say mine for the end.
You're going to say it for the end. You want to?
I've got 3 down here.
You want to? Okay. Dr. Oxendine?
My question is this. I'm wondering if we would be abandoning the concept of equity if we, by removing by having some teachers without a robust EVOS rating.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not. Maybe that's just way too technical of a discussion to have right now, but it's on my mind.
And I would say that's more discussion that is needed, as I think Mr. Buxton was saying.
That's a good one.
And there are other ways we could get at that, but I just don't know about those other ways.
Dr. O?
And I think just to add to that conversation, we also want to look at it through the lens of student equity, because we have those students taking an additional assessment compared to probably 90 to 95% of their peers in the same grade level in other parts of the state. And so I think it's kind of a dual conversation. One of it is about equity for our teachers, but also equity for our students and who's having to take more assessments because of not having a measure for a particular classroom. So just something to keep in mind, I think.
Okay, Ms. Wilby?
I'm just going to say that, In preparation for talking about this today and discussing it and listening and learning, as I always do, from Dr. Howard, but I pulled out all the things we've done in the past. This is the stack of things I kept, and it just feels like, you know, this warrants a lot of transparency at this table for discussion. It warrants a lot of input from our folks in the field. It warrants a lot of input from our department, from our technical advisors. And when I was going through this, I was astounded at the amount of time and energy and information I had. And I appreciate the issues session today. I think it'll take many hours of this for us to fully be transparent with whatever the end goal is, which is about equity. It's about serving every student. It's about doing the right thing. You know, I've been on the testing bandwagon for 18 years now, I think, but
First day.
my first day, my questions were about, you know, how we reduce the time of testing. So I'm just astounded that, you know, we can't process all this in 30 minutes and discuss it in a way that I think serves the public we are indebted to serve.
And by the way, in 2008, we eliminated 7 tests, so we didn't.
We've got, I wanted to say this, Mr. Chairman, I'm aware of my time, and I will say there are 3 other issues about being released from a test session, dealing with proctors and testing strategies that I do not believe are board policy situations. They're administrative actions, but I would just ask if anyone in reviewing the materials has any questions about those. We can certainly come back to those at another time, but realizing we're out of time, just any burning questions about those.
I'm just going to agree with her that 30 minutes, there are some related that aren't, we can't make determination on board policy in a vacuum. And so just having that discussion that shouldn't just stop here or even begin here. I think that's what we're trying to achieve, all of us. But the process will matter in this case, so there's clear buy-in. So the other piece, Eric, and this might be a question to you, is as you were considering goals, if you will, for me it begs the question, I agree with the Vice Chair that when we had those hearings across the state, they were saying, it's not tested and it's not taught, so make sure my subject's tested. And we don't want that. That's, you know, that just means that it's not a priority if it's not tested, and we've got to figure. But the next piece of that is, what are we doing with the tests? What are we doing with these? And that's the EVOS thing. But I think we've got to beg the question, particularly as it relates to stress, and stress in that classroom as it relates to teachers, and what are we doing with the tests? And I think, this is a personal opinion, I think we overdid it with bonuses. But I also know that the punitive nature of A through F grades is just going to add a huge amount of stress teachers, and then by extension into that classroom.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, let me call on Mr. Ford and our 2 advisors to close us out.
Please.
Mr. Ford.
Yeah, as previously stated, I know we don't have the time, so I just wanted to get a couple questions on record and we can revisit later. But one, I do think the superintendent is to be applauded for responding to the overwhelming sense that we need to reduce testing. I think everybody can agree on that. As well as the staff are working diligently on trying to, you know, chart a path forward. The questions I have are, I do wonder, to put simply, like, what is this designed to accomplish, right, at the end of the day? I mean, so if we reduce testing by an hour, or if we eliminate certain tests, does that really get to the root cause of what produces the anxiety? Have we addressed the stakes that really undergird the test in terms of our accountability framework? So that's something I hope to explore. Additionally, I'm really, really interested, and you've mentioned one of you, either Vice Chair Duncan or Superintendent, convening the teachers who teach those subjects and getting feedback from them as to how they would feel, right? As a former social studies teacher, I was there once the final exams were implemented, and I know what it felt like to not have priority on them and what it felt like to have priority on them, and I just want to know what the sense is from the teachers of how they would feel about this move. But again, to Ms. Willoughby's point, this is going to take some time. And so those are just the two questions I would like to lodge, and we can revisit later.
Ms. Godwin, Mr. Wallace, I'm gonna give you your last word.
Oh,
Ms.
all right.
Godwin.
You wanna go next?
No, go ahead, Lisa.
First of all, I wanted to make sure I said this because I know I comment on testing every time it comes up, and I want to make sure that Dr. Howard and Dr. Hall know that I think you guys are amazing, and I respect you immensely. And any comments I make is never to the detriment of what you're doing every single day, and I appreciate you. I just want to make sure you know that. You know, I just
Watch out. Here it
no,
comes.
they're just gonna hear a
Get your hard
repeat.
hit. My head was getting a little shiny, so.
They're just gonna hear a repeat of what I've said
Hall,
before.
take a step
I mean,
back.
I had so hoped that the ESSA plan would have led to a way of moving away from standardized testing,
Buddy Collins had it going.
being the ultimate, standard of whether our kids know content. I just really felt like we had an opportunity for alternative and truly innovative ways of assessing our students and really getting that breadth and depth of knowledge that our kids know, because it's in there, y'all. And just like, our superintendent said, a lot of these tests are reading tests.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really, getting to the meat of what our kids know and putting it into motion and implementing projects and things that show that they know what was taught. So my question is, on the levels, through 5, can there not be a way that we can combine and have the written test? Because we all give tests.
Mm-hmm.
We know we have to give tests to our students. Can we not combine testing with project-based learning or with some other means of assessing our students, and not just relying on that one day, and also moving away from the high stakes testing where our schools are graded on that one day of testing, and really look at growth. I mean, that's what it's all about, y'all. I don't care about the testing. I want to see the growth. And so I'm just speaking for teachers across the state. If we can find a way to layer it, to combine it, and get that level based not only just off the test, but also with the project-based learning, and give our kids an opportunity to show what they know, I think that would make us all a happier group of educators.
Thank you, Ms. Godwin.
And through our investment in children, as we promise our parents, your child will leave this great institution better from whence they came. And that's exactly a testament to the growth piece of it. As long as you grow, as you get to it, when you go through 180 days, as long as you go from this scale point to this scale point, you have achieved. So just to piggyback on what Lisa said, the scale score of 3, we all know, that's a range of about 3 points. I mean, that is a very, very, very small mean. So I'm concerned, the cost benefit type, if you're going to reduce it, I think it's an average of 8 to 10 questions. You're going to take the 3 away. At your next retreat, I want you to ask the superintendents that, because when we look at our data, we look at career and college reading. That's your 4s and your 5s, and then the 3s is the school, your kids are proficient. And when we look at that data as a principal, and you're looking for that that A through F grade, you're looking at it. Sometimes that 3 is a savior, because those are your bubble kids. Those are your what we call bubble kids. So I agree with a lot that's said here, but I just really want you to take into consideration those bubble kids that give you all they have, all they got. And then if they get right there and it's a 162 and that falls in the 3, and the 164 is up there at the 4 level, and then they just don't make it, if we take that out, we really need to consider that. Okay.
With your permission, I'd like to just very quickly just say that is a perfect segue to the next conversation. Because remember that level 3 is a standard error around the original standard 3. When we go to standard setting this summer, and we do need to have these conversations, when we go to standard setting this summer, we're back at the table and presenting 4 levels, and the definition of those achievement levels and those content standards drive that. So that percent at what is at each level, while I would, because I'm asked this, I would not expect it to wildly change. People are very concerned about that. I would not expect it to wildly change because the content standards have not changed as drastically as they did when, with the new assessments with Edition 4. But nevertheless, those percentages are not set in stone.
Thank you.
I just
Thank
wanna-
you, Mr. Ross.
One thing, I'll be very quick. Very important to have this conversation and get all the information that you need on it. But we also have to remember that while the board talks, teachers and students are testing.
Sure.
Right? So this is something that we can get you the information we need and we can act quickly as well. But that's what the students and teachers in North Carolina need. They need action as well.
And what we're going to do, Mr. Chairman, in the future is we're going to try to make sure we get a policy process that is sequential and plays out. So we don't have board actions that are following administrative actions. That's where we really break down in policy, and that's where we break down the communication with our educators. I think we also want to take a page from our educators and be much more innovative and comprehensive in this effort. So I think reducing testing items is a nice start. I think the kind of alternate assessments, additional ways to do this, I think the board is interested probably in a little bit more entrepreneurial and innovative approach, and want to make sure we're also doing right in terms of our standard setting levels by our educators. So we'll look forward to hearing what the field says about this. I think we got out ahead of the skis a little bit. For my committee, we did, because we got policy actions. We have to now consider that lead from the administrative actions. If we can just put this process together so that we know where we're going, I think we'll have a better product at the end of the day.
I think you've got two more, Mr. Buxton. I'll allow. Dr.
I'm
Oxton?
gonna defer.
You sure?
Next session, I'll ask 25 questions.
Okay. We can't wait. Mr. Duncan?
I just have some information requests, to get on the board for when we come back. Can we get a little more detailed study on how this is going to affect the results from a comparison standpoint the local districts get every time we change something about the testing, which this would represent a change, in order to determine where you are, you start all over again. And so some information about your views about that and where that would be, I think will be very important and helpful. In terms of the timing of the test, you noted some studies that have been done, and I'd be interested in a little bit more about that. The proportionality of the number of questions less doesn't match up with the amount of time that's less. So I'd like some more information, about how you've studied that. And for those students with disabilities, what would be the policies with respect to going overtime, and some additional information about where we are on that, I think would be helpful. The last question is outside that, it goes to proctors, and I'll be interested in more information about, I have served as a proctor also more than once. I expect probably everybody on this board probably has at one time or another. And the issue about how we still assure security becomes, I think, extremely important. So I appreciate the slide we've got on it, but I think a good bit more detail would be helpful to us. We are all aware there have been some scandals that have led to people going to prison in this area, and so I think it's an area that's not insignificant as we comply with the federal regulations, and so we'll really appreciate your insights with some more information on that. I have some others, but I'll stop, but those are informational requests for as we go forward.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Buxton. We'll now break for lunch and return at 1:30. 1:30.
I chaired this thing in 2008, Eric.
Uh-huh.
And
Tammy?
just gotta get out.
Bring in.
Include performance
The official.
based, authentic, real-world tasks of the testing.
Well, new concept, huh?